Hey there, story lovers. This is Harryverse X, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. Constantine was Harry's godfather instead of Sirius, and Hellblazer made Dumbledore fear dark arts. Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The education of a Hellblazer's ward. The flat smelled like cigarette smoke and something older, something that clung to the walls the way regret does, persistent and faintly sulphurous. It was on the third floor of a building in Newcastle that had been condemned twice and somehow kept standing through sheer stubbornness, which Constantine said was the only kind of architecture worth trusting. Harry Potter was 11 years old, sitting cross-legged on a kitchen table that had seen better decades, cleaning a knife that wasn't technically a knife. It looked like one. It had a blade and a handle, and it was sharp enough to split a hair lengthwise. But the sigils etched into the steel from hilt to tip meant it was considerably more specific in its purpose than any kitchen implement. "You're holding it wrong," Constantine said from the doorway, not looking up from the paper he was reading. "I'm cleaning it, not using it." "You're still holding it wrong." Harry adjusted his grip. Constantine turned a page. This was their dynamic, and had been for as long as Harry could remember. A push-pull rhythm of instruction that never quite announced itself as instruction, correction that arrived sideways, and a particular kind of attention that looked like inattention until you realized Constantine never actually missed anything. He was a lean man, perpetually rumpled, with a loosened tie that had been the same shade of gold once and was now something closer to old bone. His coat was everywhere with him. His cigarette was everywhere with him. His eyes, sharp and blue and carrying the specific weight of someone who has seen too much and chosen to keep going anyway, were currently on the newspaper but also, Harry knew, on him. "There's a thing in the biker district," Constantine said. "A fetch. Family's been seeing their dead daughter walk the halls for 3 weeks. The locals think it's a haunting. It's not." "How do you know?" "Because a haunting doesn't eat. The mum's been leaving food out." He folded the paper. "Half of it's gone every morning." Harry set the knife down carefully on the cloth. "A fetch that eats. That's unusual. That's one word for it." Constantine finally looked at him properly, that measuring look that wasn't unkind but was never soft. "I want you to tell me what we'd need." This was also their dynamic. "Not I'll tell you what we need. Always tell me." Harry thought about it properly, the way Constantine had taught him to think, not scrambling for answers but laying the problem out flat in his mind first, walking around its edges. A fetch was a double, a copy of something dead, called up and given just enough animation to pass for the real thing at a distance. They were usually called for grief. Someone missed the girl badly enough to, consciously or not, do something about it. "Salt line won't hold it if it's been given a body with enough substance to eat," Harry said. "We'd need the original binding object. Whatever was used to anchor it when it was called. And if we don't know what that is, then we find who called it." He paused. "The father?" Constantine pointed at him with 2 fingers and the unlit cigarette that had been tucked behind his ear for the past hour. "The father. Widower. Lost the daughter 6 months ago, lost the wife 2 years before that." He leaned back against the doorframe. "He doesn't know he did it. Accidental summoning, probably, fed by about 8 months of grief and whatever he had lying around the house that amplified it. I'm guessing the daughter's room is untouched. That's the anchor point then. Something in there." Harry slid off the table. "When do we go?" "After dark. Fetches are stronger in daylight, they draw on ambient energy, but they're more present at night, which means more vulnerable." He pushed off the doorframe. "And before you ask, yes, you're coming. You've seen a fetch before but you've never dealt with the person at the center of one. That's the harder part, and you need practice." Harry hadn't been about to ask. He'd assumed he was coming. This was also their dynamic. They ate beans on toast that evening. Constantine was a man of aggressively limited culinary ambition, and Harry read the relevant sections of a grimoire that was held together with electrical tape and what he privately suspected was hope, while Constantine smoked by the window and looked out at the Newcastle evening with the expression he wore when he was thinking about something he wasn't going to talk about. There were things Constantine didn't talk about. A lot of them. There was Ravenska. There were the friends he'd had once, the ones who came up occasionally in oblique references and never by more than a first name. There was Newcastle itself, this city he kept returning to the way a man keeps pressing a bruise. Harry had learned early not to ask about those things directly. The information arrived when it arrived, usually at 3 in the morning when Constantine had had 2 more drinks than was good for him and the mood turned reflective. What Harry did know, had pieced together from years of context and the occasional midnight conversation, was that his mother had known Constantine. Properly known him, the way you only know someone after you've been through something terrible together. Lily Potter had been brilliant with magic, genuinely brilliant, the kind of talent that comes along once a generation, and she'd been curious enough about the whole shape of the magical world, not just the sanitized Hogwarts version, to seek out people who knew the parts that didn't make the approved curriculum. Constantine had been one of those people. They'd worked together on something in the year before she died. Harry didn't know what. He'd stopped asking. What he knew for certain was that she'd named Constantine his godfather, and that when the Dumbledore person had shown up the morning after Voldemort's fall to take Harry to some relative somewhere, Constantine had already been there. Had, by all accounts, looked at the old man with his twinkling eyes and his grand plans and said something that Harry had never gotten the full version of, but which had ended with Harry coming to live in a condemned flat in Newcastle instead of a cupboard under some stairs in Surrey. Harry felt, on balance, that his mother had made an excellent choice. The biker job went the way jobs usually went, not cleanly, not quickly, but successfully in the end, which was the only metric that actually counted. The fetch was in the daughter's room when they arrived, sitting on the bed with the particular stillness of things that are alive in the wrong way. Up close it was obviously wrong, the proportions just slightly off, the eyes too steady, the breathing pattern mechanical rather than instinctive. But Harry understood immediately why a grieving father might have looked at this thing and chosen not to look too closely. The father, a heavy-set man named Bernard with red-rimmed eyes and enormous hands, broke down in the hallway when Constantine explained what it was. Not violently, he just sat down on the floor and put his face in his hands and made no sound at all. Harry stayed with him. This was what Constantine had meant about the harder part. Harry sat on the floor beside a man he'd never met and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and that was something Constantine had been very clear about. You don't fix grief. You don't talk someone out of it. You sit in it with them and you don't flinch. So Harry sat on the hallway floor with Bernard while Constantine went into the daughter's room and did what needed doing, and when Bernard finally lifted his head and asked, in a voice made entirely of broken edges, whether it had been real, whether it had been her in any way, Harry told him honestly that he didn't know, but that the love that had called it was real, and that counted for something. He didn't know where that came from. It just arrived. Constantine came out of the room, dusting his hands off on his coat, and looked at Harry with an expression that he quickly replaced with his usual neutrality. But Harry had seen it. He was getting better at catching those moments. They were in the street outside when Constantine said, "Not bad," which from him was approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. "How'd you do it?" The anchor was a hairbrush. Still had her hair in it. He lit a cigarette. Banished the fetch, gave the brush a proper send-off. The father needs grief counseling and probably a therapist, but that's not our department. We could suggest it. Already left a card. Harry looked at him. You carry a therapist's card? I carry a lot of things. Constantine exhaled smoke at the sky. We'll be needing to talk about that letter. Harry had known this was coming. He'd known it the moment the first letter arrived, 5 days ago, addressed in emerald green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the 3rd floor flat, Ellswick Road, Newcastle. He'd known it, and he'd been giving it space, the way you give a complicated thing space before you have to actually deal with it. Hogwarts, Harry said. Hogwarts. Constantine took a long drag. Your mum's school. Where most of the British magical establishment goes to develop their particular brand of magical insularity. He paused. You should go. Harry raised his eyebrows. You think it's a good idea? I think it's where Voldemort's looking for you. He said the name flat and easy, the way he said most names that other people flinched at. Better to be inside the castle than to have the castle's people wandering around trying to find you. Also, you're 11, and as much as I'd rather not admit it, there are things they can teach you that I haven't. A beat. Structured things. Community things. I'm not a school, Harry. You're better than a school. I'm a disaster with a library card and a serious problem with authority. That's different from better. He flicked ash off the cigarette. Dumbledore will be watching you. He has plans for you, he always has plans for everyone, and you specifically have been in his plans since before you could walk. So go in with your eyes open. Learn what they can teach you. Don't let him make you into what he needs. And if he tries? Constantine looked at him sideways, a flicker of something that might have been amusement or might have been something fiercer. Then you'll handle it. You're my god kid. You handle things. Harry thought about that for a moment. Are you going to be around? I'm always around. He said it with the particular Constantine quality of meaning something specific by a vague statement. Just usually not visibly. He dropped the cigarette, ground it under his heel, and walked off down the biker street with his coat settling around him and his hands in his pockets, and Harry followed, thinking about green ink letters and a world that had been waiting for him to show up. King's Cross on the 1st of September was a specific kind of chaos that Harry found both familiar and foreign, familiar because crowds and noise and the particular energy of a great many people moving with purpose were things he knew well, foreign because almost all of the people here were magical and radiating it in ways that most of them were entirely unconscious of. He could feel them the way you feel weather, a pressure change in the air. He pushed his trolley toward the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and walked through it without breaking stride. The Hogwarts Express was, he had to give it credit, genuinely beautiful. Scarlet and gold, steam billowing, the whole thing vibrating with a low-grade magical hum that you felt in your back teeth more than heard. Around him, families were separating, mothers crying, fathers being hearty about not crying, children trying to look older than they felt. An enormous ginger family was managing a tower of luggage with the practiced chaos of people who'd done this many times. Harry's trolley held a trunk that Constantine had helped him pack over 3 days, which meant it contained things that weren't on the official list alongside the things that were. His owl, Mab, a small, fierce barn owl with an outsized opinion of her own importance, regarded the chaos from her cage with aristocratic disdain. He found a compartment, stowed his trunk, and settled in. The ginger boy arrived about 10 minutes later, the last of what was evidently a very large family, looking slightly frazzled and carrying an owl of his own. He poked his head in, saw Harry, and seemed to weigh up his options. Everywhere else is full, he said. It isn't, Harry said, but you're welcome anyway. The boy grinned, a wide, uncomplicated grin that Harry's instincts catalogued as genuine before he'd consciously processed it. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron went very still in the way people did, the way Harry had been watching people go still for years when he gave that name. He'd learned to let the moment pass rather than address it, addressing it made it worse. So he just waited, and Ron shook himself and sat down and said, "Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. My mum talks about you sometimes." "What does she say?" "Mostly that she hopes you're all right." He said it simply, with no performance around it. "Are you all right?" It was such a direct question, asked without any social calculation, that Harry found himself answering honestly. "Yeah. More or less." They talked for a while, the easy, roving conversation of two people trying each other out. Ron had 5 older brothers, which explained the practiced ease and also the slight underdog quality he carried without seeming to notice it. He was funny in a dry, observational way. He had strong opinions about Quidditch. He ate an alarming quantity of sweets from the trolley and offered half of them to Harry with the unthinking generosity of someone who'd always had to share. The compartment door slid open around the halfway point of the journey and a girl with an enormous amount of hair and an expression of focused purpose leaned in. She was wearing robes that were already perfectly fitted and probably had been for weeks. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." "No toad," Harry said. "Sorry." She looked at them both in the assessing way of someone conducting a quick audit. Her eyes landed on Harry's forehead, briefly, professionally, and moved on. "You're Harry Potter," she said, but without the paralysis Ron had shown. More like someone confirming a detail. "I've read about you." "Well, I've read what's available, which isn't much and most of it is probably inaccurate." She extended a hand. "Hermione Granger." "Ron Weasley," Ron offered, though she hadn't asked. "Have you memorized your textbooks yet?" she asked Harry. "Most of them." Her expression sharpened with something that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it. "Which ones gave you trouble?" "The History of Magic one is very dry. And Lockhart's books aren't actually worth reading." "I thought they were a bit thin on practical information," she said, with the air of someone who had thought quite a lot more than that but was being polite. "What have you done for magical studies so far?" "I've been practicing some simple spells," and she drew her wand and produced a small jet of clear blue light with a precision that was, objectively, impressive for someone who hadn't started school yet. "That's good," Harry said, and meant it. She waited, very slightly, to see if he'd show her something in return. He didn't. After a moment she seemed to file that away and nodded briskly. "I should keep looking for the toad. It was nice to meet you both." She left. Ron ate another chocolate frog. "She's a lot," he said, in a tone that wasn't unkind. "She's smart," Harry said. "Yeah, I know. I have a sister." "Smart and a lot aren't mutually exclusive." Harry laughed. It surprised him slightly, the ease of it. Hogwarts, seen for the first time across the Black Lake in a night that had gone starless and vast, was the kind of sight that did something to your chest. Harry had grown up around old magic, buildings that breathed, places where the air remembered things, sites of power that hummed under your feet. He wasn't sentimental about it. But there was something about Hogwarts specifically that hit differently, an almost aggressive sense of age, of accumulated magic so thick you could feel it like a physical pressure, of a place that had been protecting children for 1,000 years and intended to keep doing so. He sat in one of the boats beside Ron and a boy called Neville, round-faced, anxious, the recovered toad clutched to his chest, and let himself simply look at it. Let himself feel the thing in his chest without analyzing it. "Wicked," Ron said softly, and Harry agreed. The great hall was all candles and long tables and the enchanted ceiling performing a convincing impression of the cloudy September sky. Harry walked in with the rest of the first years and did what he always did in a new space, mapped it in under 30 seconds. 4 tables, differentiated by colored scarves. Staff at the high table. A small, ruffled professor leading them in. And at the center of the high table, a man with a very long white beard and half-moon spectacles and a specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who are extremely aware of being observed. Dumbledore was watching Harry with exactly the careful, unobtrusive attention that Harry had been told to expect. Not unkind attention. Not hostile attention. The attention of a man doing a calculation. Harry met his eyes briefly, neutrally, and looked away. The sorting hat turned out to be literally a hat that talked, which was, Harry decided, either the most interesting thing in the wizarding world or the most eccentric, depending on your frame of reference. The hat sang a song about the houses, which Harry listened to with the same attention he gave everything. Then the sorting began. Hermione Granger went to Gryffindor with the kind of inevitability that a hat announcement could still somehow make feel dramatic. Neville Longbottom, after a long deliberation, also went to Gryffindor, and the relief on his face was specific and private in the way of someone who'd been afraid of a different outcome. Ron Weasley went to Gryffindor immediately, the hat barely on his head. Then Professor McGonagall called, "Potter, Harry." The hall's noise didn't stop so much as pause, a half-second of collective held breath. Then the whispers started, moving through the tables like a wind through grass. Harry walked up to the stool, sat down, and put the hat on. For a moment, nothing. Then a voice in his ear, dry, ancient, with the quality of something that has considered a great many things over a very long time. "Well, you're not what I expected." "I rarely am," Harry thought back. "No. You're not." A pause that felt like genuine reflection. "You've been places, young man. Seen things. The conventional sorting criteria apply to you in technically accurate ways that would miss almost everything that actually matters." Another pause. "You could be Slytherin. The ambition is there, under the discipline. You could be Ravenclaw, your mind is exceptional. Hufflepuff, yes, actually, more than people would guess." The voice seemed to settle something. "But there's a particular kind of courage in you. Not the shouting kind. The kind that knows exactly what it's walking into and walks in anyway." Harry waited. "Yes. I think, Gryffindor." The lion table erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it to McGonagall, and walked to the Gryffindor table where Ron was waving enthusiastically from the middle and Hermione had already moved to make room on the bench. He sat down, and someone passed him food, and the feast began. Across the hall, at the staff table, he was aware of Dumbledore watching him with the particular quality of a man revising an estimate. And at the end of the staff table, in a turban that seemed slightly too large and sat on his head with an odd insistence, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor was also watching him. Professor Quirrell. A man with a nervous blink and a slight tremor and a turban he kept one hand near whenever he thought no one was looking. Harry noticed all of this and said nothing and ate his dinner. The next morning, at breakfast, a pale blonde boy materialized beside him, having crossed from the Slytherin table with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether he had the right to go anywhere. Draco Malfoy was exactly what he looked like, a boy wearing his family's expectations like armor, shined to a high polish, with eyes that were quicker and more uncertain than the surface was supposed to show. "Potter," he said. Like he was trying out the word. "Malfoy," Harry said pleasantly, because he'd asked Ron at dinner and Ron had given him the full briefing on Slytherin family trees with the practiced exhaustion of someone who'd heard it all from older brothers. Draco seemed slightly thrown by this, apparently he'd been expecting either ignorance or nervousness. He recovered. "I thought we might talk. My family knows a great deal about the wizarding world that you might find useful." Harry suggested. "I was going to say valuable." "I appreciate the offer," Harry said. "I'll keep it in mind." He returned to his eggs. Draco stood for a moment, recalibrating. This clearly hadn't gone the way his script had it going. "You know," he said, "choosing the wrong friends can be, I generally choose friends I like," Harry said. "It's worked out fairly well so far." Ron, next to him, was developing an expression of profound appreciation. Draco looked between them, settled on the decision that this was a retreat rather than a defeat, and went back to the Slytherin table. "That was beautiful," Ron said quietly. "He's not wrong that his family knows a lot," Harry said, which surprised Ron. "He's just wrong about why that would obligate me to anything." Ron considered this. "You're going to be interesting to know, aren't you?" "Possibly." The classes were, on balance, more interesting than Harry had expected and less interesting than Constantine had warned him about, which meant they landed somewhere in the range of genuinely engaging on good days and productively dull on bad ones. Charms, taught by Professor Flitwick, was delightful. Flitwick had the quality of a man who genuinely loved his subject and taught with an infectious precision. Transfiguration, under McGonagall, was demanding and elegant and Harry found he liked the rigor of it. Herbology was peaceful. History of magic was, as predicted, deeply and magnificently boring, and Harry used the time to read. Defense Against the Dark Arts was the class that sat wrong. It wasn't the material, such as it was fine. Bland, but fine. It was Quirrell himself. The stammer, the nervousness, the insistence on not touching the turban, there was a performance quality to it. Harry had spent too much time around Constantine, who was the greatest performer Harry had ever met, not to recognize the difference between someone who was nervous and someone who was playing nervous. The tells were there. The hands were too controlled. The eyes, when they weren't tracking the room, were looking inward at something. Harry sat in defense against the dark arts and learned the watered-down syllabus and watched Quirrell with the patient attention Constantine had spent years instilling, and at the end of the third week he went back to the Gryffindor common room and wrote a letter. John, something's off with the Dada teacher. Not sure what yet. We'll keep watching. The school is interesting. The headmaster is exactly what you said. My friends are good, I'll tell you about them when I see you. Have you dealt with that thing in Edinburgh yet? He sent it with Mab, who departed with the air of someone who had better things to do than carry post. The reply arrived 3 days later, Harry, don't touch it yet. Watch, only. Trust your instincts about the teacher but don't act without more information. Edinburgh was Edinburgh. It always is. Tell me about the friends. J.P.S. Dumbledore's written to me. Formally. Very polite. Very careful. P.P.S. I wrote back. Less politely. Harry read the postscript twice and then folded the letter and tucked it into his trunk and went to help Hermione with a transfiguration problem she'd been working through at the common room table, because that was where life actually was, and the other thing, Quirrell, Dumbledore, the shape of things not yet revealed, would come in its own time. He was patient. Constantine had taught him that too. The thing about having grown up outside Hogwarts was that certain things that were apparently meant to be frightening landed differently. In the second week, in potions, Professor Snape arrived in a sweep of black robes and a silence that he clearly cultivated and maintained with purpose. He was a lean man, dark-eyed, with a voice that had been engineered over years to deliver maximum unsettlement with minimum volume. He looked at the class. He took the register. And then he looked at Harry. Ah, he said. Mr. Potter. Our celebrity. He said it the way you'd say a word you didn't believe in. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class went quiet. This was evidently a ritual, a specific kind of hazing that everyone could feel the shape of. Harry had read the potions texts. He'd also grown up around someone who used potions in ways that weren't in any school curriculum, which meant he'd absorbed a great deal more than the approved versions. Draught of living death, he said. The asphodel and wormwood combination produces a sleeping potion of extraordinary power. The asphodel is associated in old magical tradition with regret and mourning, which is relevant to its potency. The older sources suggest emotional attunement strengthens the draught. A beat. Where would you look, Snape said, with slightly less of the performance in his voice, if I told you to find me a bezoar? The stomach of a goat. It acts as an antidote to most poisons, which is why the old cunning folk kept goats and the trade in goat bezoars was significant in pre-Reformation magical Britain. I've read that in some communities possession of a bezoar was considered reliable evidence of a witch, which is an interesting inversion of the usual association. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind the black eyes that Harry couldn't quite categorize. And what, Snape said, very quietly, is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Also called aconite. Extremely toxic, affects the heart and nervous system. In magical contexts it's used in wolfsbane potion to allow werewolves to maintain their minds during transformation. In non-magical contexts it was associated with Hecate and used historically in ointments that may or may not have been genuine, the literatures contested. He paused. Is there a specific application you'd like me to speak to? Another long pause. Then Snape said, it seems that fame isn't everything. And moved on. Ron, beside him, was staring. After class, in the corridor, He grabbed Harry's arm. "Where did you learn all that?" "My godfather has an extensive library and very strong opinions about knowing things properly." "Who's your godfather?" Harry thought about how to answer this. "He works in a specialized field of magic that isn't really taught at Hogwarts." Ron accepted this with the slightly glazed expression of someone receiving more information than expected. "Right. Is he nice?" Harry considered John Constantine, his cigarettes and his grimoires and the Newcastle flat and the way he'd sat outside the room in biker while Harry sat with a grieving man on the floor. "He's good," Harry said. "That's more important than nice." It was 3 weeks into term, on a Wednesday evening, that Dumbledore did what Harry had been waiting for him to do. "Professor Dumbledore would like to see you," said Professor McGonagall, appearing beside Harry at dinner with the brisk neutrality of someone delivering a message rather than an opinion. Harry nodded, finished his pumpkin juice, excused himself to Ron and Hermione, and went. Dumbledore's office was exactly what it would be, circular, full of quietly spinning instruments whose purposes were various and in several cases classified, portraits of previous headmasters dozing in their frames with the slightly theatrical quality of people who were listening while pretending to sleep. More actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now, The Hellblazers Ward Chapter 2. Things that live in libraries. Dumbledore's office had the quality of a room that had been arranged to produce a specific effect. Harry noticed this the way he noticed most things. Not with suspicion exactly, more with the professional appreciation of someone who'd grown up around a man who arranged rooms for effect as a matter of survival. The spinning instruments were placed just so, the warmth of the fire calibrated, the bowl of sweets on the desk performing a studied informality. Even Fawkes, the phoenix on the perch in the corner, seemed positioned, a creature of extraordinary beauty at the exact point in the room where the firelight caught it best. Harry sat down in the chair across from Dumbledore and waited. "Sherbet lemon?" Dumbledore offered. "No thank you," Harry said. "I find them clarifying." Dumbledore unwrapped one for himself, unhurried, and Harry recognized the technique, establishing comfort, establishing pace, suggesting that this was a casual conversation between people with all the time in the world. "I wanted to welcome you properly, Harry. The sorting ceremony is rather impersonal for such an occasion." "It seemed efficient," Harry said. The blue eyes behind the half-moon glasses were doing something subtle that Harry's face was carefully not responding to. "You're settling in well, I'm told. Your professors speak highly of your preparedness." "That's kind of them." Professor Snape seemed particularly. A careful pause. "Interested. He asked me questions and I answered them. I think he expected me not to be able to." "And where did you learn so much about potion ingredients?" There it was, the reason for the meeting, arrived at in its own time. Harry looked at Dumbledore with the patient openness that Constantine had refined in him through years of watching how interrogations worked. "Give people what looks like an open door. It's usually a test of what they'll walk through." "My godfather has a very good library," Harry said. "And he believes in knowing things properly." "John Constantine," Dumbledore said, and said the name with a particular careful quality, like a man handling something that had burned him before. "Yes. I imagine," Dumbledore said, "that growing up with John has been educational." "It has been," Harry agreed pleasantly. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment something shifted in the quality of the attention, the calculation becoming more visible, or more honest, it was hard to say which. He had the eyes of someone extremely intelligent who was also extremely aware of his own intelligence, which was its own kind of limitation. "Harry, I want you to know that my door is always open to you. Whatever questions you have, about your parents, about the wizarding world, about anything at all, I hope you'll feel you can come to me." "I appreciate that," Harry said. "Your mother was a remarkable woman." Something in Harry went very still. Not with pain exactly, it was an older feeling than pain, more like the particular gravity of a thing that matters too much to be treated carelessly. "She was," he said. "From everything I've been told. John and I," Dumbledore said, "have different views on a great many things. I want you to know that those differences needn't define your experience here. You're free to form your own opinions. I always do, Harry said. He left the office 5 minutes later with the pleasant, specific feeling of having given nothing away. October at Hogwarts settled into its rhythm the way October always does, the days shortening, the castle growing warmer in opposition, the work intensifying as though the school itself was reacting to the outside chill by demanding more from the people inside it. Harry's life acquired a texture he hadn't quite expected. He'd known school in the abstract. Constantine had made sure of a solid general education alongside the magical training, but he hadn't anticipated the specific shape of belonging somewhere. The common room in the evenings, the particular noise of it, Ron's commentary on everything and Hermione's footnotes on Ron's commentary and the background hum of 30 other people doing the ordinary business of learning and arguing and growing. It was, he realized somewhere around the third week of October, something he hadn't known he wanted. He didn't examine it too closely. Constantine had strong opinions about examining contentment. In charms, Flitwick had moved them on to Wingardium Leviosa, which was a foundational levitation charm and also, Harry suspected, the kind of test that looked simple and wasn't. The mechanics were straightforward but the execution required a particular feeling, not force, which was the instinct most people followed, but suggestion. You had to persuade the object rather than move it. Swish and flick, Flitwick was saying, demonstrating with a feather that rose obediently. Remember, light touch, precise wand movement. Miss Granger, would you like to demonstrate? Hermione's feather rose immediately and stayed there with the focused stillness of something well controlled. Flitwick beamed. Excellent, excellent. Harry performed the charm without particular fanfare on his first attempt, the feather rose and stayed at the exact height he'd aimed for, and returned to watching the class, which was where the real interest was. Neville Longbottom, 2 seats over, was creating a feather that trembled violently and occasionally shot sideways without lifting. The magical output was there, Harry could feel it, but the direction was all wrong. The wrist on the swish, Harry said quietly, between Flitwick's rounds. You're breaking it too hard at the end. It needs to stay flexible. Neville looked at him with the expression of someone not accustomed to receiving advice without a layer of condescension attached. Then he tried it. The feather rose 6 inches, wobbled, and held. Oh, Neville said. Oh, thank you. Hermione was watching this from across the table. Later, in the corridor, where'd you learn to teach? I grew up being taught by someone who taught sideways, Harry said. It rubs off. She walked beside him toward the library, which was where they were both going independently and had started going together because the logic of it was undeniable. Constantine, she said. It wasn't quite a question. He's mentioned him. Ron mentioned him. He said you were raised by a specialist in unusual magic and that you knew a lot more than you were showing most of the time. She looked at him sideways. Are you showing most of the time? I'm showing what's relevant, Harry said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed, it isn't. She considered this in the particular way she had, not letting things go, but filing them accurately rather than pursuing them relentlessly. The defense against the dark arts reading list, she said, shifting topics with the ease of someone who decided to let a thread rest for now. I've gone through it. It's very limited. Very, Harry agreed. I've been supplementing from the library. There are better texts in the restricted section, I can see them from the catalog, but obviously we'd need a note from a professor, Harry said. Which Professor Quirrell won't provide, because I asked and he said the restricted section wasn't appropriate for first years and then changed the subject. She said this with the crispness of someone reporting an anomaly. Did you find that odd? Harry had found a great many things about Quirrell odd. A bit. I found it very odd, Hermione said precisely. A defense against the dark arts teacher who won't facilitate access to advanced defense texts is either incompetent or has a specific reason for limiting what students know. Neither option is particularly reassuring. Harry looked at her. She had arrived, through pure logical analysis, at approximately the same position he had arrived at through something less logical and more instinctive, and she had done it in about 3 weeks. "You're very good at this," he said. She looked pleased in the careful way of someone who wanted to be pleased but wasn't certain of the ground. "At what?" "Noticing things." "There's a great deal to notice," she said. "Most people just don't." They went into the library and parted to their separate tables and worked for 2 hours in the companionable silence of people who find each other's presence useful. Harry, between his charms essay and his transfiguration reading, was working through a book he'd brought from Constantine's library, a slim, battered volume on sympathetic magic theory that wasn't on any school curriculum and that would have made Madame Pants very interested in him if she'd seen the title. He kept it inside the charms textbook, which was large enough to conceal it completely. Hermione noticed. Of course she did. She said nothing. Later, as they were leaving, she said, "Sympathetic magic theory?" Harry looked at her. "The binding that holds your charms book open is wrong for the chapters you're supposed to be on," she said. "You're reading something inside it." He considered her for a moment. Then he showed her the spine. Her eyes widened slightly, then went focused and sharp. "Where did you get that?" "That's not, I've looked through the catalog and there are maybe 3 texts on sympathetic theory in the restricted section and none of them are that edition." "My godfather's library." "Can I?" She stopped. "Start it again. Would you consider allowing me to read it when you finished?" Harry thought about this. Thought about Constantine's books and the rules around them, not rules about sharing, there were no such rules, but the understanding that you didn't give something like this to someone unless they could handle what it contained. He'd been watching Hermione Granger for 3 weeks. She had the best mind in their year. She also had something less quantifiable, a specific kind of intellectual honesty, an unwillingness to pretend things didn't mean what they clearly meant. "Yes," he said. "When I'm finished." She nodded, once, with the gravity of someone accepting something they understood the weight of. Ron found out about the book 2 days later, because Ron had the investigative instincts of someone who'd grown up in a large family where knowing what was happening was a survival skill. He didn't ask to read it. He asked what it was for. "Sympathetic magic works by establishing correspondence," Harry said. They were in the common room after dinner, the fire going and the room thinning out around them. "Like effects like. You create or find a link between one thing and another, and then what happens to one affects the other. Like voodoo dolls." Ron said. "Voodoo is one regional expression of a broader global practice. The doll method is basically a sympathetic link made physical. There are subtler ways." Harry closed the book. "It's not on the Hogwarts curriculum." "Why not?" "Because it can be used very effectively for harm, and the wizarding world solves that problem by not teaching it to anyone." A beat. "The problem with that approach is that the people who need to understand it in order to defend against it end up ignorant." Ron was quiet for a moment, processing. "And Constantine taught you this stuff?" "He taught me to understand it." "Understanding something isn't the same as using it." He looked at Ron. "Your brothers ever teach you anything the school didn't?" Ron grinned. "Fred and George practically have their own curriculum. Mum's furious about half of it." He picked up a chocolate frog card and examined it. "I think what you mean is, knowing about dark things doesn't make you dark." "That's exactly what I mean. Dad says something similar. He works with muggle artifacts at the ministry, things that have been hexed or jinxed. He says the people who are most dangerous around those objects are the ones who've been told they're forbidden without being told why." Harry thought about Arthur Weasley, whom he'd never met but was developing a very positive impression of. "Your dad sounds sensible," he said. "He's brilliant," Ron said simply. The ministry doesn't always agree." He shrugged, but the shrug was doing some work. Harry let it rest. Outside the common room windows, the October dark had come down fully, and somewhere below them the school moved through its evening routines, portraits walking between frames, ghosts drifting through stone, and in the corridors on the third floor something that neither the portraits nor the ghosts went near. Harry had been to the third-floor corridor once, on a deliberate Tuesday afternoon. He'd stood outside the locked door and listened to the breathing behind it, low, rhythmic, vast, and thought, dog, and then thought, something behind the dog, and then thought, this is worth understanding better, and gone to dinner. He hadn't gone back yet. He was thinking about it. The library at Hogwarts had a smell that Harry associated immediately and permanently with something close to happiness, old paper and wood polish and the specific dry warmth of a space that has contained knowledge for centuries. He went often, sometimes with Hermione, sometimes alone, and the visits were producing dividends. He'd found 3 useful texts on the open shelves already. One on the theory of magical protections, layered enchantments, how they interacted, where their weak points were. One on the history of dark objects in British magical tradition that was more informative than its bland title suggested. And one, tucked in the back of the history section where it had clearly been misfiled decades ago and left to gather dust, that was ostensibly about agricultural charms but contained, in a 2-page appendix with a different typeface from the rest of the book, a precise and technical description of a containment methodology that Harry recognized from 3 of Constantine's journals. He'd borrowed all 3 under Madame Pance's efficient surveillance and read them in his dormitory and made notes in the small black notebook he carried everywhere. Constantine had given him the notebook at the start of term. On the inside cover, in his godfather's handwriting, write everything down. Memory is useful. Notes are more useful. And always write down what you don't understand, those are the questions that matter. Hermione had seen the notebook. She'd asked. He'd shown her the inscription without comment and watched her read it twice. She'd returned the notebook and gone back to her own work without saying anything, which was possibly the most perceptive response she could have given. It was a Wednesday in mid-October when Harry found the mirror. He hadn't been looking for it. He'd stayed late in the library past the official closing time. Madame Pance allowed this with a specificity of conditions that Harry had navigated correctly on the second attempt, and was cutting back through a corridor on the 5th floor that he hadn't used before because it was a longer route. The torches were down to half brightness. The portraits were asleep. The castle had the particular quality of an empty building that wasn't quite empty, aware of itself in the way very old places sometimes are. He turned a corner and there it was. The mirror of Ariste stood against the wall of an empty classroom, the door left open or never closed, with a quality of having been placed rather than forgotten. It was taller than he was by several feet, ornate, with an inscription carved into the frame that took him approximately 4 seconds to read backward, I show not your face but your heart's desire. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at it. Then he walked in and stood in front of it. What he expected to see, what he would have put money on seeing, in the moment before he saw it, was his parents. His mother and father, the young dead couple from the photographs Constantine kept in a shoebox on a high shelf that Harry had found when he was 7 and asked about and been answered honestly. He'd expected that ache, the one that lived in the specific register of thing that should have been and wasn't. What he saw was himself. Just himself, standing where he stood. Except he was older, mid-20s maybe, with the lines of a grown person's face, and he was standing in some space that Harry didn't recognize, with a quality of settled certainty about him, and at the edge of the image, barely visible, there were people beside him. Ron, he thought. Hermione. Others he couldn't make out clearly. Not a family, exactly. Something more chosen. Something built rather than inherited. Harry looked at it for a long time. Then he stepped back, turned away, and walked out of the classroom. He was in the corridor when the voice came. Not from behind him. From ahead, a shape emerging from the shadows at the junction, moving toward him with the careful gait of someone who had been standing still for a long time and was allowing himself to be seen. Dumbledore, in deep purple robes, with his hands folded and his expression suggesting this was either a coincidence or the best performance of a coincidence Harry had ever seen. I sometimes walk these corridors late at night, Dumbledore said pleasantly. I find the castle quite different in its evening disposition. So do I, Harry said. A pause. Did you look in the mirror? No point in denying it. Yes. What did you see? Harry considered. Then he said, honestly, something I'd have to work for. Dumbledore watched him with those careful eyes. Something in the calculation was shifting, Harry could feel it, a variable that wasn't landing where it had been placed. Many people, Dumbledore said, see things in that mirror that destroy them. They sit in front of it and cannot leave because what they see is so much better than what is. A pause. It is perhaps one of the most dangerous objects in the castle. I can see why, Harry said. And yet you walked away from it. The things in it aren't real, Harry said. They're potential. You can't live in potential. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, something in his voice had changed in a way Harry couldn't entirely categorize, less performance, more honesty, though he wasn't certain yet which was which. Your godfather, he said. Did he teach you that? He taught me that wanting something badly is only useful if it makes you move toward it, Harry said. Sitting in front of an image isn't moving. He bid Dumbledore good night and walked back to the common room, and behind him he heard nothing, no movement, no footstep, just the silence of a very intelligent man recalibrating. Hermione found him the next day with a look on her face that he'd come to recognize as her I have found something and I am cross about it expression, which was different from her I have found something interesting expression in the quality of the energy it carried. Fluffy, she said, sitting down across from him in the library. Pardon? Hagrid's dog. The one on the third floor. She opened a book, she'd come prepared, and turned it to face him. A page of text on three-headed dogs, mythology, history, magical usage. It's called a Fluffy. Hagrid breeds them. And it's standing on a trapdoor. Harry looked at her. How do you know about the trapdoor? I've been looking at the structural plans of the school. They're in the archives section, Hogwarts, a history includes them in the appendix. There's a chamber below the third-floor corridor that isn't in the current layout, which means it was walled off or modified after the castle's original construction, which suggests it was repurposed. She closed the book. Someone has put something down there. Something they want protected. A three-headed dog is a first layer of protection, there are almost certainly others. Harry sat back. Who else have you told about this? No one. Just you. She met his eyes. You already knew about the dog. I heard it, he said. Stood outside the door. And you didn't go in. Not yet. He looked at her. I'm going to need to eventually. She took a breath, not of fear, or not only of fear, more the breath of someone accepting that a choice has been made around or before them. Then we should find out what's under it before we go down. We, he said. She gave him the specific Hermione Granger look that communicated, without words, that the question was slightly insulting. Obviously. Harry grinned. He couldn't help it. All right. Then we start in the library. Something down there is being protected at that level for a reason. Nicholas Flamel, Hermione said immediately. I keep coming back to that name. I heard Hagrid mention it to Dumbledore when I walked past his office by accident 3 weeks ago and I've been trying to find a reference ever since. She looked frustrated. There's almost nothing in the general catalogue. Then we find the right restricted section text, Harry said. For which we need a note. For which we get a note, Harry said. Flitwick likes us. He'll sign a research note if we give him a plausible topic. Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone who was genuinely uncertain whether to be impressed or unsettled. You're very comfortable with this. With what? With navigating institutional systems sideways. I grew up with someone who considers rule systems interesting puzzles, Harry said. Not obstacles. Puzzles. Ron, appearing from behind a bookshelf with a book about chess strategy tucked under his arm, said, Are we planning something? You both have planning faces. We're doing research, Hermione said. That's the same thing with you too. He sat down uninvited and entirely at ease. What are we researching? They told him. His expression went through several stages: surprise, interest, a flash of something that might have been anxiety that was immediately swallowed by a grin. So basically we're investigating a secret chamber under the school that a three-headed dog is guarding. Researching the context first, Harry said. Then investigating. Great. Let on. He plunked the chess book on the table. But first, Harry, play me. I've been trying to figure out your game for a week and I can't. Harry looked at him. Please, Ron added. It's driving me mental. Harry pulled the chess board toward him. Hermione watched them set up pieces with the expression of someone who found this frivolous but was choosing not to say so, which was itself a form of growth that Harry noted privately and warmly. Ron opened with the Queen's Gambit, which was aggressive and interesting, and Harry responded in a way that made Ron sit up and start actually thinking, and for an hour the library was full of nothing but the quiet of three people occupied with things they cared about, and the investigation could wait, and that was fine. It was a Friday evening when Snape stopped Harry after potions. The classroom had emptied with the specific speed of people who had somewhere better to be, which was anywhere. Harry had been deliberately slow in packing up, noting a residue in one of the cauldrons near the back that suggested someone had been attempting a significantly more advanced potion than today's lesson during a free period and done it incorrectly. He'd been considering this when Snape's voice came from the front of the room. Mr. Potter. He finished putting his kit away and approached the desk. Snape stood with his arms folded, studying Harry with the quality of a man performing an examination he wasn't going to announce. The dramatic staging, the dimly lit classroom, the lingering potion smells, the deliberate containment of his own expression, was impressive craft. Harry appreciated it honestly. Your practical work, Snape said, is unusually competent for a first year. Thank you, Harry said. It isn't entirely a compliment. Unusually competent suggests unusual preparation. Hogwarts generally begins from a common baseline. I had an atypical education. So it appears. The black eyes were doing the examination. Who taught you potions? Nobody specifically. I read voraciously. The distinctions in your practical technique, the temperature management in particular, suggest hands-on training that goes beyond reading. The way you adjusted the heat on the third stage of last week's boil cure was specific. It's a technique I've only seen in practitioners who've worked in field conditions. Harry said nothing. Snape was a great deal sharper than the performance suggested, which, given that Harry had assumed sharp from the beginning, meant he was sharper than that. Your father, Snape said, was a different kind of student. Talented. Undisciplined. Inclined to use his ability as a replacement for effort. He paused. You are not like your father. I'm told I have his hair, Harry said. Something moved in Snape's expression, not warmth, but something that acknowledged the comment had landed. Your mother, he said, was genuinely gifted. The best student I taught in her year. Upbeat, precise and deliberate. She would have found your education interesting. Harry looked at him. Snape was looking at the middle distance now, the examination over, something else in its place, complex, old, carefully maintained. Did you know her? Harry asked. We were in the same year, Snape said. She was a friend once. He returned his eyes to Harry. That is not relevant to your work in this class. What is relevant is that you are progressing beyond the set curriculum. I want you to complete the standard work, all of it, without cutting corners. And then, he paused, as though the next words were a decision being made in real time. I may have additional texts to suggest. If you're genuinely interested in the subject rather than merely performing competence. I'm genuinely interested in most subjects, Harry said. Yes, Snape said. That seems to be your particular problem. And he swept away toward his supply room, clearly done, and Harry gathered his bag and left. In the corridor he stood still for a moment, thinking. Snape had been Lily's friend. Snape watched him with something complicated, not the cruelty some of the other Gryffindors reported, which Harry had observed but which was never directed at him with the same edge. Something else. Something that was looking for his mother in his face and finding her and not knowing entirely what to do about it. Harry filed this carefully. The letter arrived on a Sunday in late October, not by Mab but by a school owl with no return address, just his name in Constantine's handwriting, which told Harry everything about the level of caution being applied. Harry, something's moving in the background of what you've written me about. The teacher, I did some asking around. Careful asking, no tracks left. What I found isn't conclusive but it's suggestive in a specific way I don't like. Don't confront. Don't engage. And whatever is under that floor, don't go near it alone. There's also something you should know about the object being protected, if my guess is correct. Nicholas Flamel has been working on something since before your parents were born, something that Voldemort would consider a solution to his particular problem of not being entirely dead. If Flamel's stone is in that school, then Voldemort is looking for a way in. He hasn't got one yet. I'd like to keep it that way. Write back immediately. Harry read the letter once, then twice, then folded it and sat on his bed in the dormitory, empty on a Sunday morning, everyone else at breakfast, and thought. Voldemort. Not a name he'd grown up fearing. Constantine had said it with the flatness you give something that's dangerous but manageable, something you deal with when it arrives rather than something you lie awake anticipating. But in the school, that was specific. That was an immediate problem rather than a future one. He thought about Quirrell. The turban. The hands kept too controlled. The nervousness that was performance. He thought about the third floor. The breathing behind the door. He thought about the mirror, not his reflection in it, but what it had shown him. People beside him. Things built rather than inherited. He wrote back in the small black notebook's back pages, tore them out, and sent them with the school owl. John, I think it's already in. The teacher, I think it's wearing him. The stone is below the dog. I won't go alone and I won't confront yet. But I need you to tell me what you know about how Voldemort anchors himself to a living host. Everything. He sent it before breakfast. By the time he was sitting across from Ron and Hermione in the Great Hall, eating toast and listening to Ron's commentary on the Quidditch fixtures and watching Hermione read 3 things at once, the letter was already out of the castle. Quirrell sat at the staff table and cut his food into precise small pieces and didn't look at Harry. Harry didn't look at Quirrell either. But the morning felt different now, sharper, as though the castle had adjusted its resolution, and the day that had seemed ordinary a week ago was revealing its actual structure, and beneath it, below a stone floor under a door with a 3-headed dog behind it, something was waiting. Harry ate his toast and thought about all of it, and let none of it touch his face. Chapter 3, The smell of brimstone. The last day of October started with a cold that had come overnight, the kind that settles into stone buildings and refuses to leave, and by the time Harry came down to breakfast the Great Hall had the specific atmosphere of a place trying too hard to compensate, more candles lit than usual, the enchanted ceiling performing low gray clouds that everyone kept glancing at with mild resentment. Halloween decorations had been appearing since the previous afternoon. Hundreds of jack-o'-lanterns floated near the ceiling, and the ghosts were in unusually high spirits, nearly headless Nick practicing a nearly completed decapitation demonstration near the Gryffindor table that Neville was making a sustained effort not to watch. "It's actually not so bad," Ron said, studying the ghost with the objective curiosity of someone raised in a magical household. "He's got about an inch of neck still connected, which means technically, please," Hermione said. "I'm just saying, structurally, Ron." Harry ate his porridge and looked at Quirrell, who was at the staff table with his usual breakfast arrangement and his usual performance of a man perfectly comfortable in his own skin, which was the thing that kept nagging at Harry like a loose thread he couldn't stop pulling. A genuine nervous person had rhythms, unconscious self-soothing, small habitual movements that recurred and varied. Quirrell's tells were consistent. They were the same every day, which was the thing about a performance. Real anxiety was organic. This was choreography. He'd received Constantine's response 2 days ago. It had arrived folded inside a volume on magical theory that looked like a schoolbook from the outside and very much wasn't, delivered by a nondescript owl that Harry didn't recognize and which departed immediately, leaving no opportunity for anyone to trace the exchange. Constantine was, whatever else could be said about him, exceptional at operational security. The letter had been brief and very dense. Harry had read it 4 times. Host possession works through fracture. The host's will has to be compromised first, either by fear, trauma, or sustained magical assault, before the possessing entity can establish itself. What's left of Voldemort isn't complete enough for full possession. More likely a symbiotic anchoring, he's feeding from the host's life force and using his body as a vehicle. The host may be partially willing or may have been broken down over time. The turban is significant. Voldemort's current form would require concealment. Whatever's left of him is attached to the host's body somehow and has to be kept covered. Check the back of the teacher's head. Do not let Voldemort know you understand. He will move faster if he thinks you've identified him. The stone is his objective, he needs it, which means he hasn't got it, which means the castle's protections are currently doing their job. I'm dealing with something in Cardiff that I can't leave yet. I'll be in Hogsmeade by November. Don't do anything interesting before then. Harry had written back, define interesting. The response, which arrived the next morning, you know exactly what I mean. Don't. So Harry was not doing anything interesting. He was eating porridge and watching Quirrell and being patient, which Constantine had once described as the most underrated skill in the practical magician's toolkit and which Harry had been cultivating with some effort because patience was not his most natural mode. He was better at it than most people his age. He was less good at it than Constantine, who could watch something for months with the still attention of a cat and then move with absolute precision at exactly the right moment. But November was soon, and Harry could wait. He thought he probably could. The troll arrived at 7:30 in the evening. Harry heard about it the way the rest of the hall heard about it, Quirrell bursting through the doors in a state of professional panic, stammering about a troll in the dungeons, before collapsing against the doorframe in a way that suggested either genuine distress or its most convincing imitation. Harry watched him through the chaos that followed, students surging to their feet, Dumbledore's voice cutting over the noise with calm authority, prefects organizing their houses, and what he saw in Quirrell's face was not fear. It was attention. Specifically, attention directed toward the Gryffindor table with the focused quality of someone tracking an object they were looking for. Harry was already standing. He turned to Ron. Hermione's not here. Ron blinked. What? She wasn't at dinner. Check the common room, if she's not there, she's in the bathroom on the 2nd floor, the one she uses after the other girls were unkind about her on Thursday. He'd noticed this without remarking on it, the way Hermione sometimes disappeared to a particular place when the social dynamics of being the person she was became temporarily too much. Go with your house. I'll check the bathroom. Harry, Dumbledore said stay together. Go, Harry said, not unkindly, and moved. The corridors were emptying fast, the thunder of feet heading upward as students complied with the prefect directions. Harry moved against the grain of the crowd on the stairs, using the instincts Constantine had spent years building into him, reading movement patterns, finding the gaps, not forcing through but flowing around. He was at the 2nd floor in under 2 minutes. He heard the troll before he reached the bathroom. The smell came first, something old and organic and deeply wrong, like the inside of something enormous that hadn't been cleaned ever. Then the sound, a rhythmic, heavy impact that he felt in his feet before he heard it in his ears, and a low sound from behind the bathroom door that wasn't quite a scream, compressed into something smaller by shock or breathlessness. Harry pushed the bathroom door open. The troll was approximately 12 feet of solid grey violence, club in one hand, apparently fascinated by the cubicle it had just reduced to rubble. Hermione was in the corner, back against the wall, white-faced and absolutely still in the precise way of someone who had understood that movement was currently the wrong choice. She had her wand in her hand. She hadn't fired anything yet, which was, Harry thought, in the circumstances, the correct call. A first year's Wingardium Leviosa was not the tool for this specific problem. The troll hadn't noticed him yet. Harry assessed in under 3 seconds. Club. Low center of gravity. Eyes positioned like prey not predator, which meant poor frontal vision but decent peripheral. The club was the dangerous element, the troll itself was slow, but the arc of a 12-foot club in a school bathroom was enough to cause problems regardless of speed. He drew his wand, stepped fully into the room, and said, "Hey." The troll turned. Harry sent a blinding hex into its eyes, not a Hogwarts first-year spell, not a Hogwarts any-year spell, with the flat precision of someone who'd practiced it until it was reflex. The troll made a sound like a landslide going wrong and threw its hands up. The club hit the ceiling and took out 3 feet of stone. Harry was already moving, pulling Hermione by the arm toward the door while the troll stumbled, its vision temporarily obliterated, crashing into the sinks with an impact that cracked the floor. They were in the corridor when the bathroom behind them expressed its structural feelings about the situation through the sound of approximately everything inside it failing simultaneously. Hermione was shaking. Not visibly, she had good control, but Harry could feel it through her arm, the fine tremor of someone running on adrenaline and refusing to show it. He got her 10 feet down the corridor and stopped, and she pulled her arm back and straightened herself with the specific, fierce composure of a person putting themselves back together in real time. "I had a plan," she said, which was possibly the most Hermione Granger sentence he'd ever heard. "The plan needed updating," Harry said. "What was that spell?" "I'll explain later." She looked at him, assessing, sharp, filing the moment precisely. "Is everyone all right?" Ron's with his house. "He's fine." "How did you know where I was?" "I noticed," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression, the controlled, careful surface she usually presented, shifted fractionally, something genuine and a little unguarded pushing through. "You noticed I was upset?" "Yes." "You didn't say anything at the time." "You didn't want me to," he said. "Some things need space, not discussion." She was quiet. Behind them the bathroom was still settling, a slow cascade of debris. "The girls," she said. "It was nothing serious. Just, I find it difficult when people are unkind about things that shouldn't matter." "It matters," Harry said. "Being unkind is always about the person doing it, not the person receiving it. But it still lands." She looked at him with the expression she occasionally got, not quite surprise, more the specific recalibration of someone encountering something that didn't fit their existing model. Then she said, "We should find Professor McGonagall before she finds us." "Yes," Harry said. "We're going to be in trouble." "Probably." "Worth it," she said, and started walking, and Harry walked beside her, and that was that. McGonagall found them before they found her, in the way that McGonagall generally arrived before being looked for when something had gone wrong in her vicinity. She came around the corner with Professors Snape and Quirrell behind her, her face arranged in the particular configuration that suggested she was simultaneously furious and relieved and was not going to show either properly. "Potter. Granger." Her eyes went to Hermione first, checking for damage, then to Harry with the more complex attention of someone assessing a situation. "What in Merlin's name?" "There was a troll in the bathroom on the 2nd floor, Harry said. "It's not going anywhere now. The bathroom is mostly structural history." McGonagall looked past them at the corridor, where the sounds from the bathroom had subsided into the occasional slow settling of rubble. Behind her, Snape was examining Harry with the tight-jawed attention of someone adding columns. Quirrell was looking at a point slightly above and to the left of Harry's head, which was his tell for looking at something he wanted not to seem to be looking at. "Miss Granger," McGonagall said, "you were not with your house." "You were told, I didn't hear the announcement," Hermione said. "I was in the bathroom when everything started. I couldn't get out because the troll was already inside by the time I knew it was there." She was there because of Thursday's incident in Charms, Harry said plainly. McGonagall looked at him sharply. Some of the girls were unkind to her, Harry said. She retreats to that bathroom because it's quiet and no one uses it. I knew that, so I went to find her when she wasn't at dinner. He held McGonagall's gaze. I didn't want her to be alone in there if something was wrong in the castle. There was a particular silence. McGonagall stood very straight and said, in a voice a few degrees warmer than her expression, that was, a responsible decision. She paused. A dangerous one. But responsible. She looked at both of them. 10 points to Gryffindor each for presence of mind. And 5 points from each of you for being out of bounds during an emergency lockdown. She straightened. Go to your common room. Both of you. Now. Harry went. On the way past Quirrell he looked directly at the professor for exactly 1 second, not with suspicion, not with challenge, just looked, and Quirrell's hands tightened, barely, on the sleeves of his robes. Harry walked on. He replicated the blinding hex for Hermione 3 days later in an empty classroom after dinner, first explaining the theory, then the wand movement, then the intention behind it. She was an extraordinarily fast study, the kind of fast that comes from genuine understanding rather than rote repetition. This isn't in any of the standard texts, she said. No. Or the restricted section catalog. Also no. Where does it come from? It's a modification of an old Muggle-adjacent tradition, Harry said. Cunning folk magic. The kind that develops separately from the formal wizarding tradition and doesn't have the same theoretical underpinnings. He sat on a desk. Constantine's grandmother was from a long line of cunning folk in Somerset. She taught him a lot of practical magic before he went into the more theoretical stuff. He taught me. Hermione was quiet, working through this the way she worked through everything, not dismissing it because it didn't fit the framework, but expanding the framework instead. So there's an entire tradition of practical magic that Hogwarts doesn't teach. Several traditions. Across multiple cultures. Harry watched her face. The wizarding world as structured at Hogwarts tends to treat itself as the complete picture. It isn't. Dumbledore must know this. Of course he does. He's extraordinarily well-read. Then why isn't it taught? Institutional reasons, Harry said. Some of it's about control. You can manage what people do with magic if they've only learned within a single framework. Some of it's about class. The cunning folk traditions were associated with rural, often poor communities, and the Hogwarts system developed from a more socially elevated base. And some of it is genuinely about safety. Some of this magic is dangerous in ways that are harder to supervise than standard spellwork. Hermione absorbed this with visible intensity. You're saying the wizarding educational establishment has systematic gaps that are partly structural and partly deliberate. I'm saying, Harry said, that knowing something is out there is different from knowing it. And most of the people making decisions about what gets taught here have only learned within the framework they're now administering. She looked at him. How do you see it so clearly? You're 11. I'm 11 and I was raised outside the framework, he said. The outside view is always clearer. She was quiet for a moment, then said something he didn't expect. I felt that way about primary school, she said. I grew up reading. I'd read more than most of the teachers by the time I was 9. They didn't always like it. They called it showing off. She paused. I think sometimes the institution's main interest is in people fitting into the institution. Constantine says the same thing, Harry said. He says any system that rewards fitting in over thinking clearly has mixed up its priorities. He sounds, she considered. He sounds difficult. He is, Harry said. He's also right about this. She tried the blinding hex 3 more times before they left the classroom. On the 3rd attempt it produced a clean, focused pulse of light. Not full strength yet, but the shape was right. The intention was right. Keep practicing, Harry said. Obviously, she said. The Quidditch match was the first Saturday in November, and Harry had been made Gryffindor Seeker under circumstances that McGonagall had presented as standard discovery and Harry privately suspected were slightly more political than that. He didn't mind. The broomstick was genuinely extraordinary, a Nimbus 2000 that handled like an extension of his own balance, and the game, when he'd first watched a practice from the ground, had the particular quality of something that required the specific combination of physical intelligence and spatial awareness that he'd discovered, slightly to his own surprise, he enjoyed enormously. Constantine had sent him a letter about it. You're playing Seeker for the first-year team, which I gather from Minerva's note is unprecedented. Try not to catch the snitch in the first 30 seconds, let the game breathe. The entire wizarding world will watch your every move now and you don't need to give them the spectacle they're expecting. Also, watch your broom. I don't trust the teacher with the turban near a sporting event. Harry had read the last line twice. The morning of the match was cold and sharp, the sky the color of polished steel, and the pitch when they emerged from the changing rooms was already packed, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw filling the neutral stands, the house stands packed to overflowing, and an energy in the crowd that Harry could feel from the ground before they mounted up. He flew well. Not ostentatiously, he wasn't trying to perform, but he was genuinely good on a broom in the way you're good at things that come naturally and then receive proper attention. He circled high above the game in the Seeker's traditional holding pattern, watching the snitch space while also watching the field, and it was comfortable in a way that surprised him. He was on his fourth circuit when his broom went wrong. It wasn't an accident. That was the first thing he clocked, the specific quality of a magical interference rather than a mechanical fault, the way the broom bucked and twisted with direction rather than randomness. Someone was saying an incantation, and the incantation was targeted, and it was getting worse. He held on. The physical reality of this was genuinely challenging. The broom was attempting to unseat him with increasing violence, and the drop from his current height was not a comfortable one, but he was not panicking, because panic was a luxury for situations where you hadn't been trained. He'd spent 3 years learning to manage being in physical danger, and the training asserted itself with the reliability of something well-built. He thought, find the source. He looked down at the staff stand while fighting the broom with his legs and one hand. Snape had his eyes locked on Harry and his lips moving. Constantine's letter, watch your broom. But then, there. Quirrell. Not watching Harry. Watching Snape. With an expression that, from this height, read as concentration layered over fury layered over something very like actual fear. Harry processed this in approximately 2 seconds. Snape wasn't the threat. Snape was countering the spell. Someone else had started it, and Snape had noticed and was now locked in a silent magical duel played out over a Quidditch pitch while neither of them let on. Hermione, in the stands below, had apparently reached similar conclusions through different methods. He'd see her recount later, because she was already moving, ducking along the road toward the Slytherin stand, which was in the wrong direction unless you were trying to get to a specific person rather than get away from something. 30 seconds later the broom stabilized. Clean, sudden, like a switch flipped. Harry circled once to confirm the recovery, then moved because the distraction had been enough for the snitch to drift to an uncontested spot below the Hufflepuff stand and it seemed like a waste not to. He caught it between both hands 20 seconds later, coming out of a steep dive with the snitch held up so the entire stadium could see it, and the roar that went up was the kind of noise that lived in the chest. He flew to the ground on pure momentum and landed cleanly, and Ron and Hermione reached him at the same time from different directions, Ron from the Gryffindor stands already incoherent with enthusiasm, Hermione with her robe slightly singed and an expression of fierce satisfaction. Quirrell, she said in his ear. It was Quirrell. I know, Harry said quietly. Snape was, he was countering it. He was actually protecting you. I know that too. She pulled back and looked at him. How long have you known about the teacher? Since week 3, he said. But I didn't know about Snape until today. She absorbed this with the speed she absorbed everything. What do we do? We celebrate, Harry said, because Ron was now physically incapable of restraining himself and Neville had somehow ended up in the air on someone's shoulders and the match was won, and these things mattered too. And then we figure out the next piece. He let Ron drag him into the team celebration and drank the butterbeer someone's older sibling had sent and laughed at Percy Weasley's long-suffering face and felt, despite everything currently underneath and above and around the situation, genuinely happy, which was not nothing. Which was in fact quite a lot. He slipped out of the castle at 7:30 that evening. Not invisibly, he had several ways of moving through a space without being seen, none of which required an invisibility cloak, and the evening after a Quidditch victory was a specific kind of chaos that made unobserved movement relatively simple. He went out through the side entrance near the greenhouses, across the grounds in the near dark, and down through the village path to the edge of Hogsmeade. Constantine was in the Three Broomsticks, which was technically closed to students but which Constantine had apparently been drinking in since before most of the current students' parents were born, judging by Madame Rosmerta's complete absence of surprise at his presence. He was at a corner table with a cigarette burning in the ashtray beside him, a glass of something amber in his hand, and the coat. Always the coat. He looked at Harry over the rim of the glass with the sharp, steady attention that didn't quite count as warmth but was in the same family. "Nice catch," he said. Harry sat down. "You were there." "I was nearby." He set the glass down. "Tell me what happened." Harry told him. All of it, start to finish, in the flat, efficient way Constantine had taught him, observed facts first, interpretations second, clearly labeled as interpretations. Quirrell's spell. Snape's counter. The broom stabilizing. Hermione's movement. The catch. Constantine listened without interrupting, which was one of his skills and not an uncomplicated one. When Harry finished, Constantine was quiet for a moment. He lit the cigarette, drew on it, exhaled smoke at the low ceiling. "Snape protected you," he said. "Yes. That's a development. He seemed to turn this over. I had him flagged as a potential problem. He was deeply involved with Voldemort before the war, Death Eater, true believer, the whole performance. Then he switched sides, which Dumbledore vouches for, which I find interesting because Dumbledore vouching for something means Dumbledore has an investment in it. He knew my mother," Harry said. "They were friends." Constantine looked at him. There was something in his expression, not surprise, a more precise thing, the expression of a man seeing a connection he'd suspected become confirmed. "That would do it," he said quietly. "Lily had that effect on people. She was the kind of person that got into your head and stayed there." He took another drag. "Snape's protecting you because of her. That's complicated, and it means he's an asset, but it also means his loyalty is to a ghost rather than to you specifically." "I understand the distinction," Harry said. "I know you do." Constantine stubbed out the cigarette and immediately took another one out. "Voldemort wants the stone. He's been trying soft approaches, surveillance, testing the protections, feeling out the castle's defenses. The Quidditch attack suggests he's getting impatient. Something's changed in his timeline. He's getting weaker," Harry said. "If he's anchored to a living host and feeding from it, the host is deteriorating. He has a finite window." Constantine looked at him with the expression he wore when Harry said something that was correct in a way he found simultaneously gratifying and alarming. "That's exactly right. Which means the situation has a deadline, and the deadline is not comfortable." He leaned back. "I need to do something about this." "What?" "Nothing you need to know about yet." He looked at Harry steadily. "What I need you to do is nothing precipitous. No heroics, no direct confrontation, no going below the dog. Not yet." "I know. I mean it specifically," Constantine said, with a flatness that was not anger but was close enough to its cousin to be distinguishable. "I know you. When you feel a situation developing, you want to move into it rather than wait. It's a good instinct in small situations. This is not a small situation." Harry met his eyes. I heard you. Hearing and doing are different things. John, Harry said, with a patience that was its own kind of communication. I heard you. A beat. Constantine looked at him, the full look, the one he didn't give often, that saw past the surface to whatever was underneath. Then he nodded, once, and picked up his glass. Good. How are your friends? The shift was so clean and complete that Harry blinked. Good, he said. They're good. Granger figured out about the teacher before you confirmed it to her. She's extraordinary, Harry said, and meant it without reservation. The Weasley boy. He's loyal and funny and braver than he gives himself credit for. Harry paused. He's the first person I've met who wanted to be my friend before he wanted to be friends with Harry Potter. Something shifted in Constantine's face, very briefly, very privately. That matters, he said. Hold on to that. I know. No, he stopped. Reconsidered. I mean, I know you know theoretically. I'm saying hold on to it in the specific, practical sense. Don't let what's coming erode it. He looked at his glass. I've let good things go because the situation seemed to require it, and in my experience the situation always seems to require it and you always regret it later. Harry sat with this for a moment. Constantine didn't speak like this often, directly, without the deflection of wit or the armor of practical instruction. When he did, it landed like something dropped from a height. Is this about someone specific? Harry asked. Several people, Constantine said. None of them still around to ask. He drained his glass and stood up. Go back to the school. Don't use the village path, McGonagall's had someone watching it since 7. Use the slope behind the herbology greenhouses and come in through the east side entrance. How do you know about the east side entrance? I went to school here, Constantine said. Harry stared at him. You went to Hogwarts. Long time ago. He buttoned the coat. Slytherin, before you ask. I wasn't going to ask, Harry said. You were absolutely going to ask. He looked at Harry with that sharp, fond expression that he generally kept brief. Go. And write me when something changes, which it will, probably within the month. What are you going to do about the school? Constantine put on his coat properly, shrugged it into place, and picked up the battered travel bag that lived beside his feet wherever he went. Talk to Dumbledore, he said, with the quality of someone planning something they're not looking forward to but intend to do thoroughly. And then probably argue with Dumbledore. And then do what I was going to do anyway, which Dumbledore won't like. He dropped a handful of coins on the table, nodded to Madame Rosmerta, and walked out of the 3 broomsticks into the November night. Harry sat for a moment in the warm, quiet pub, listening to the fire and the distant sounds of the village, thinking about the shape of things, the stone below the dog, Quirrell at the staff table, Snape watching him in potions with those complicated eyes, Constantine walking into the dark with the absolute certainty of a man who has already decided. He thought about what Constantine had said about letting good things go. He stood up and went back to the school through the slope behind the greenhouses, exactly where he'd been told, and came in through the east side entrance into the warm stone corridor, and went up to the common room where Ron had saved him a seat by the fire and Hermione was demonstrating to Neville the correct grip for a charms exercise and everything was, for now, intact. He sat down. Ron handed him a chocolate biscuit from a tin his mother had sent. Hermione looked up, assessed him, and returned to her explanation without comment. The fire was warm. The castle settled around them with its nighttime sounds. Tomorrow the situation would continue developing, and Quirrell would sit at the staff table and watch him, and something below the floor of the 3rd corridor was waiting. But tonight was tonight, and Harry ate his biscuit and lost a game of chess to Ron that was genuinely competitive for the first 30 moves, and went to bed at midnight with the particular feeling of someone who knows what's coming and has chosen, deliberately and with full information, to be exactly where they are. Chapter 4, What Dumbledore Doesn't Know. The castle emptied for Christmas with the enthusiasm of water finding a drain, gradually, then all at once, until by the morning of the 23rd it was down to a skeleton of students scattered across houses with varying degrees of apparent cheerfulness about remaining. The Weasley twins were staying, which meant the corridors had a different quality of danger than usual. Neville was staying, quiet and undemanding and happy enough with his plants. A handful of Ravenclaws. A Hufflepuff named Hannah who spent most of her time in the library with a focus that Harry respected. Ron was staying. This had come up a week before the holidays in the specific way of Ron, sideways, buried in something else, almost embarrassed. Mum wanted everyone home, he'd said, not looking up from a chess problem, but Fred and George have this thing they're setting up in the back garden that apparently requires supervision, and Percy's going home anyway, and honestly I thought, he'd moved a night. The castle's interesting when it's empty. Harry had understood immediately that what Ron was actually saying was something closer to "I didn't want you to be alone here if you were staying," which was characteristically Ron, the generosity delivered so obliquely that it almost hit itself. "I'm glad you're staying," Harry said. Ron had moved another piece. "Obviously. Someone has to beat you at chess properly." Hermione had gone home to her parents. "They see very little of me during term and they're being remarkably good-natured about the whole magical world situation," and had left Harry a list of research priorities with footnotes and a recommendation for secondary sources that was, objectively, a Christmas present in disguise even if she'd framed it as practical information. The castle at Christmas was a different creature than its term-time self. The decorations were extraordinary, 12 Christmas trees in the Great Hall alone, the enchanted ceiling performing snow that melted before it landed, the warmth of the fires pitched higher against the winter outside. Without the crowd it felt both larger and more intimate, the scale of it suddenly apparent now that you weren't always navigating around 500 other people. Harry had been looking forward to this. The space to move around the castle properly, to follow the threads he'd been pulling at since September, to think. The invisibility cloak arrived on Christmas morning. It was wrapped anonymously, no note, placed among his other gifts with the specific quality of something that wanted to seem casual. Harry unwrapped it with Ron watching over his shoulder and held it up, fine, extraordinarily fine, with a silvery quality that wasn't quite like any material he'd ever handled and which, when he ran his thumb along the edge, had a faint magical signature that was old. Genuinely old. "Blimey," Ron said. Harry draped it over his hand and watched his hand disappear. The magic was seamless and deep. This wasn't a standard disillusionment or concealment charm, this was something woven into the object at a level that made conventional detection nearly impossible. A genuinely exceptional piece of magical craft. "It's an invisibility cloak," Ron said, with the reverence of someone who has grown up knowing what those are. "I know what it is," Harry said. "Do you know how rare?" "I know." Harry held it for a moment. The unsigned note that had come with it was still in his hand. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. Use it well." No signature. But the handwriting was distinctive, precise, slightly ornate, the hand of a man who had written a very great deal over a very long time. Dumbledore. Harry looked at the cloak. He had, in fact, already owned an invisibility solution for 2 years. Constantine's method was different, older, required no object but left you with a slight temperature drop in cold weather that was occasionally inconvenient. But this was different in kind. This was his father's. That was specific. He also, however, recognized it for what it was. "It's a test," he said. Ron looked at him. "What? Why send it anonymously? Why now, at Christmas, when the castle's half empty? A genuine gift of an heirloom is a personal act. Here's an extraordinary tool, no instructions, no oversight." He turned it over in his hands. "He wants to see what I do with it." Ron was quiet for a moment. "You think Dumbledore would do that? Give you something and then watch to see what you use it for?" "I think Dumbledore is the most intelligent person in this school by a considerable margin," Harry said, "and I think intelligence on that scale never stops doing calculations. The gift is real. My father's cloak is actually my father's cloak and I'm genuinely glad to have it. He folded it carefully. It's also absolutely a test. Both things are true. Ron absorbed this with the slightly glazed expression of someone recalibrating. Right, he said. So what do you do with it? Exactly what he's presumably hoping I'll do with it, Harry said. Investigate the thing I've been investigating, but on my timeline and in my way. He put the cloak in his trunk. Not dismissively, with care, with the specific attention you gave something that belonged to a person who was gone. Then he pulled out the chessboard, because it was Christmas and the investigation could wait another hour, and Ron lit up and set the pieces in place with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting all morning. The third-floor corridor on Christmas night had the quality of a place that hadn't been visited recently, the torches down low, the dust undisturbed on the stone, the cold coming up from below in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Harry moved through it with the cloak over his shoulders, not because he was hiding, he was allowed to be in the corridors, technically, during the holidays, but because he wanted to be able to observe without being observed, which was a different thing. He stopped outside the locked door and listened. The breathing was the same. Vast, slow, rhythmic. 3 rhythms, slightly offset, overlapping in a pattern that was almost musical if you were the kind of person who found that sort of thing musical. He pulled the cloak off and folded it over his arm and unlocked the door with a basic Alohomora followed by a secondary ward release that the basic charm wasn't equipped for. He'd mapped the ward over 3 visits and knew its structure now, and went in. The dog, 3 heads, enormous, apparently named Fluffy if Hermione's source was accurate, was asleep. All 3 heads, down on its forelegs, breathing the slow deep breath of something genuinely unconscious rather than resting. Harry stood very still and identified the source, a small harp in the corner, playing itself, a slow repeated figure that was either enchanted or winding down. There was still about 20 minutes in it, he judged. He looked at the trapdoor. Then he got down on one knee and examined it properly, the lock, the hinges, the ward structure laid into the edges. Solid work. Not quick work. Someone who knew what they were doing had spent real time on this. He identified 4 distinct magical signatures across the ward structure, which meant 4 different casters, which meant a team. He didn't go through. That wasn't the point of tonight. The point was this: he needed the exact shape of what was down there, not just something is being protected, but the full picture, the specific architecture. Because what Constantine had warned him about, what the stone's presence in the school implied, wasn't just about Voldemort wanting an object. It was about Voldemort having a plan. And plans had structures, and structures had weak points, and the weak point was always the thing the planner assumed you wouldn't notice. He examined the trapdoor for 15 minutes, took mental notes, and left. The dog's breathing never changed. The harp played on. He locked the door behind him and stood in the corridor and thought about what he'd seen. Then he heard footsteps. Not the random footsteps of a nighttime castle, these had direction and purpose, and they were coming from the staircase at the end of the corridor. Harry put the cloak on. Dumbledore came around the corner. He was walking slowly, hands behind his back, looking at the floor in the particular way of someone thinking rather than looking. He stopped outside the locked door. Stood there for a moment. Then, and Harry watched this from 2 feet away in complete invisibility, he placed one hand flat against the wood and stood very still, with his eyes closed, for almost a full minute. Harry understood what he was doing. Feeling the wards. Checking the integrity. Making sure the thing behind the door was still in place. He looked tired. Not physically. Dumbledore moved with the easy economy of someone in excellent health for any age. Tired in the way of someone carrying something that didn't get lighter with time. His face, without the performance of the office, without the twinkle and the careful warmth and the strategic openness, was the face of a man who had made a great many decisions and was still living with all of them. Harry stood 18 inches away from him and breathed shallowly and thought about what Constantine had said: he plans in decades and sacrifices pawns. He didn't think Dumbledore was cruel. He thought Dumbledore was something more complicated, a man who had convinced himself that the suffering he caused in the service of the greater good was a necessary cost, and who had done this convincing so thoroughly and so long ago that he'd stopped feeling it as suffering and started feeling it as strategy. Dumbledore withdrew his hand from the door, looked at it for a moment, and walked back the way he'd come. Harry stayed still until the footsteps had completely faded, and then a little longer, because the little longer was usually the part that mattered. Then he went back to the Gryffindor Tower and sat on his bed in the dark and wrote a very long letter to Constantine. The response came on the 27th. Not by owl. By a sharp knock on the window of the fourth-floor classroom that Harry had been using as a private study space since Christmas Eve, a classroom that faced the grounds and which he'd mentioned in his letter with the specific room number and window placement, because Constantine always came to find him rather than announcing himself at the main entrance. The owl on the windowsill wasn't an owl. It was a raven, which told Harry everything about where Constantine had been in the interim. He opened the window and took the letter. The raven departed without waiting to be thanked, because ravens don't wait. Harry, I'm in Hogsmeade. Don't use the village path, I know you know about the slope. Meet me at the Three Broomsticks tonight at 9. Come properly invisible, not just the cloak. I've spoken to someone who knows what's under the trapdoor. All of it. We need to talk. Also, I've been in contact with Flamel directly. He's not happy about the stone being in a school. We've had words. He has opinions. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Harry showed the letter to Ron, who had been sitting in the corner of the private study with his chessboard and a bag of Honeyduke's chocolate that his mother had sent. Ron read it, ate a chocolate, and said, "Should I stay here?" Harry said. "If anyone checks the common room, I'm asleep with a headache." "Right." Ron looked at him. "Harry." "Yeah. Be careful." It was so simply said, not performative, not loaded with the weight of everything they both knew was underneath the situation. Just be careful, the way you said it to someone you meant it about. Harry looked at him for a moment. "I will," he said, and meant it. Constantine looked like a man who had been to Cardiff and then to wherever you went to speak to Nicholas Flamel, which were apparently both places that left a mark. He was more rumpled than usual, the coat carrying the specific smell of a lot of different places in succession, and there were shadows under his eyes that suggested the Cardiff thing had been worse than the letter had indicated. He looked, when Harry sat down across from him, at Harry with the full assessment, checking for damage, which was habit, finding none, which was apparently satisfying. "Good Christmas," he said. "The cloak arrived," Harry said. Constantine nodded, something in his face settling into a more complex configuration. "I know. Dumbledore wrote me." Formally, with full explanation of why he was giving it to you and what he intended by it and what he hoped I would, he stopped. "He hoped I would endorse it as a gesture of goodwill and use it as an opportunity to encourage you to trust his judgment." "What did you write back?" "I thanked him for returning your father's property." A pause. "And I told him that if he was going to run psychological operations on my godson through heirloom delivery, he should at least be honest about the methodology." Harry felt the particular warmth he associated with Constantine doing something that was technically combative but was, underneath, protective. How did he respond? Politely. Constantine said the word with the expression you'd use for something that was technically accurate and completely insufficient. "He's very good at politely. He invited me to the school, which I was going to do anyway. I said I'd come tomorrow." Harry looked at him. "To the school?" "To the school. Officially. As your godfather, for a scheduled holiday visit." He picked up his glass. "Which will also give me the opportunity to have a conversation with Dumbledore in person, which I've been putting off for long enough." "What will you say to him?" "Several things," Constantine said. "In a specific order." He set the glass down. "But first, here's what I found out about the stone and what's under the trapdoor." He talked for 40 minutes. Harry listened in the way Constantine had taught him to listen, Not just for information but for the shape of information, for what was included and what was omitted and what the silences contained. What emerged was both more complex and more specific than Harry had imagined. The Philosopher's Stone, Flamel's Stone, 600 years of accumulated work and wisdom distilled into a single object of extraordinary power, had been moved from Gringotts at Dumbledore's request and placed in Hogwarts as a security measure after an attempted robbery that Harry suspected was Quirrell's work and which Constantine confirmed was exactly that. The protections below the trapdoor had been contributed by various staff members, the dog from Hagrid, a series of increasingly complex obstacles from different professors, each designed to filter out all but the most capable and specifically skilled intruder. Dumbledore's theory, Constantine said, is that Voldemort won't be able to get through all the protections alone. He needs a physical body for the last stage, which he doesn't have, and a host body that's deteriorating isn't enough. So he's been trying to get someone to retrieve it for him. Quirrell, Harry said. Quirrell, who has been, by all accounts, trying to work through the protections for 2 months and getting stuck because the protections weren't designed for a partial soul trying to use a failing human body as a vehicle. He paused. There's also a final protection that Dumbledore designed himself. I don't know what it is. I think it's the mirror, Harry said. Constantine's eyes sharpened. The Ariste. He moved it down there. I went back to the 5th floor room where I found it in November and it was gone. If the last protection is the mirror, then someone can only retrieve the stone if they want to find it but not use it, if they want it but don't want what it does. Constantine looked at him steadily. That's a piece of very clear thinking. It means Voldemort can't get through the last protection regardless, Harry said. He wants the stone specifically to use it. The desire to use it bars him. Yes, Constantine said. Which is elegant and also the reason the stone is currently safe. He was quiet for a moment. It's also why Dumbledore isn't moving faster to resolve the situation. He's confident the stone is secure because the last protection is one that can't be outthought. He's wrong about how long Quirrell's body can sustain the possession, and he's wrong about how desperate Voldemort is willing to be, but he's right about the mechanics of the mirror. So the danger is Voldemort going before the stone is ready, Harry said. Doing something drastic. Or doing something to you, Constantine said. It was said flat and without drama, the way he said things that were serious. You're a loose end in Voldemort's story, Harry. You're the only documented case of someone surviving the killing curse, and you did it as an infant, which means the magical circumstances of that night are unresolved. He'll want to deal with you eventually. Right now he's focused on the stone. But if he gets desperate, he'll come for me, Harry said. He'll try, Constantine said, with the specific quality he gave certain statements, absolute, quiet, the quality of something that was not negotiable. Harry looked at his hands on the table for a moment. What happened that night? When he tried to kill me and couldn't? Constantine was quiet for a long moment. The Three Broomsticks was quieter than its term-time self, 2 elderly witches in the corner, the fire, Madame Rosmerta moving glasses behind the bar. Outside the windows, Hogsmeade lay under a clean foot of snow. Your mother died for you, Constantine said finally. Deliberately, consciously, with full knowledge of what she was doing. That kind of sacrifice, voluntary, absolute, specific, creates a magical protection that is older than any formal spell system. It's in the oldest traditions. Love as a magical force. Not a metaphor. Actual, measurable, specific magic generated by an act of completely selfless sacrifice. He paused. Voldemort didn't know about it. He's brilliant, and he's read everything, and he still didn't know about it, because it's not in the formal wizarding texts, it's in the cunning folk traditions, the folk practices, the parts of magical knowledge that the established wizarding world considers beneath scholarly attention. He looked at Harry. Your mother knew. That's why she did it the way she did. Harry sat with this. He'd known some version of it, the bones of it, but not the specifics, not the mechanism. Not the image of his mother standing in front of a killing curse with full knowledge of the theory. She was the smartest person in the room, he said. She was the smartest person in most rooms she was ever in, Constantine said. And she was brave in the specific way, not the loud way. The quiet, complete, entirely decided way. He looked at his glass. She chose you over everything else without a moment's hesitation and without any drama about it, and that lack of drama was somehow the most brave thing about it. Harry looked at him. You loved her, he said, and it wasn't quite a question. Constantine was quiet for long enough that the answer wasn't necessary. She was my friend, he said finally. One of the few actual ones. He stood up, pulling his coat straight. Come tomorrow. Officially, at a proper time. I'll be in the headmaster's office at 11 and you should be there too. Why should I be there? Because it's your situation and you should be in the room for the conversation, he said. Don't let anyone manage you from the outside. He left money on the table and walked out, and Harry finished his drink and sat for a moment in the quiet of the pub with the warmth of the fire and his mother's ghost moving gently through the conversation just finished, and thought about love as actual measurable magic, and about a woman who had been the smartest person in the room and had used that intelligence for something irrevocable and complete. He walked back to the castle through the snow, not invisible at all. The meeting in Dumbledore's office the next morning had been scheduled for 11, and at 11:05 all three of them were there, Dumbledore behind his desk with his fingers laced and his expression settled into its most genuine configuration, which Harry had been learning to recognize as distinct from its most performed one. Harry in one of the chairs, not with the slight unease of a student summoned, but with the particular stillness of someone who was present for a reason. And Constantine, standing, because Constantine didn't sit in situations where he felt the room was arranged to put him at a disadvantage. The coat was on. The cigarette was not yet lit, which in itself communicated something about the level of deliberate restraint being applied. Fawkes was on his perch. One of the dozing portraits, a round-faced man in an enormous green hat, was definitely not asleep. John, Dumbledore said. Albus, Constantine said, with an easiness that was entirely deliberate. You look well. The beard's longer. Still the half-moons? I find them useful for observation, Dumbledore said, with a quality that acknowledged the implicit point. I'm sure you do. Constantine looked around the office with the thoroughness of someone taking inventory. Nice instruments. The one on the left, is that a soul fragment detector? A beat. It's a general magical resonance instrument, Dumbledore said carefully. Right. Constantine looked at Harry briefly, a quick flicker that communicated, noted. Then back to Dumbledore. Harry tells me you gave him his father's cloak. I returned it, yes. I know what you thought, Constantine said. Not aggressively, conversationally, with a flatness that was somehow more penetrating than aggression. You thought you'd give him something real, which was genuinely kind, and you thought you'd see what he did with it, which was an intelligence operation. Both things at once, because you're incapable of doing one thing at once. Dumbledore looked at him. You make that sound like a criticism. It is a criticism. It's not a total condemnation, but it is a specific criticism. Constantine moved to the window, looked out at the grounds, looked back. I'm going to tell you what I know about what's in this school and what you're proposing to do about it, and then you're going to tell me the parts I've got wrong, and then we're going to have an honest conversation about the parts you haven't told me yet. That seems, Albus. Constantine said it with the specific quality of someone closing a conversational exit. I found Quirrell. I know about the stone. I've spoken with Nicholas, who is extraordinarily unhappy and who told me considerably more than he told you, because Nicholas and I have history going back to the 80s and he trusts me in the specific way he doesn't trust official channels. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I also know about the protections below the trapdoor. All of them. Dumbledore was very still. The calculation behind his eyes was almost visible, a man processing new information and adjusting his position with the speed and thoroughness of genuine intelligence. Nicholas spoke to you directly, he said. 2 days ago. He's concerned, and rightfully so, that an object of that power is sitting in a school with 600 children in it and a Voldemort-possessed professor walking around the staff table every morning. A beat. He's also concerned that your plan involves letting Voldemort attempt to retrieve the stone and then catching him in the act, which he describes, and I'm quoting directly, as the stupidest bloody plan you've come up with in 40 years. That is not, Dumbledore paused. That is a somewhat reductive characterization of a complex strategy. Is the stone bait? Constantine asked. A pause. The situation is more nuanced. Is the stone bait, Albus? The room was very quiet. Fawkes made a soft sound. The portrait in the green hat had very definitely stopped pretending to be asleep. The stone is, Dumbledore said carefully, currently serving as an inducement for Voldemort to remain in a location where he can be monitored and eventually dealt with. Yes. With what plan for dealing with him? There are several, using Harry, Constantine said. The plan involves Harry, eventually. That's what you've been building toward. The protections are designed so that the right person can get through them, a student could, if they were exceptional enough. You've engineered a situation where, when it comes to crisis point, a child who survived Voldemort once is your best instrument. Harry had been listening to this with the focused attention of someone hearing an articulation of something they'd been sensing but not yet named. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Something in the old man's face, for the first time since Harry had known him, moved in a way that didn't seem entirely strategic. A crack in the architecture. I have always wanted to protect you, he said, and it was genuine. Harry could tell the difference, had been able to for years. Whatever my methods, and I concede they have been, perhaps, more instrumental than, you wanted to protect him by keeping him ignorant and positioning him for sacrifice, Constantine said, and there was an edge in it now, something that had been held back and was being allowed a controlled release. The Dursleys. That was your protection. 10 years with people who, that was an error, Dumbledore said. Not defensively. With the specific quality of a man acknowledging something he'd carried. The blood protection required, I know what the blood protection required. I also know it required a blood relative, not specific blood relatives, and that Petunia was not the only option. He looked at Dumbledore without the calculated ease now, just directly. You chose the option that kept Harry away from the magical world. Away from information. Away from anyone who might tell him things you hadn't decided he was ready for. That is an uncharitable reading, it's an accurate reading, Constantine said. I'm not saying it makes you a villain, Albus. I'm saying it makes you someone who prioritized his plan over the specific reality of the child in it. He looked at Harry. Which is why Harry lives with me. A long silence. Dumbledore's hands, laced together on his desk, were very still. And your method of raising him, he said finally, carefully, has produced a remarkable young man. I won't pretend otherwise. The boy sitting in that chair right now is, he looked at Harry with something that was close to honest wonder. Not what I expected. That's because you expected someone you'd shaped, Constantine said. You got someone who shaped himself. He sat down, finally, in the other chair. Now. The stone needs to go back to Flamel. Quirrell needs to be removed. And the plan where Harry is the instrument of Voldemort's defeat needs to be scrapped, or at minimum completely redesigned with Harry's full knowledge and consent. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. Voldemort cannot be dealt with through conventional means at present. He is without body, without physical form, sustained by dark magic that has roots in traditions I've been studying longer than you've been headmaster, Constantine said. I know how to deal with what he currently is. It's not clean and it's not certain, but it's considerably better than putting a child in front of him and hoping the love magic holds. The love protection is real and it's powerful and it's not a strategy, Constantine said flatly. It's an asset. Assets get used, they're not strategies. Harry looked between them, two extraordinarily intelligent men, both of whom were in some sense trying to protect him, both of whom had different architectures for what that meant, and both of whom were, in this specific moment, more honest with each other than they'd probably been prepared to be. He thought about the mirror and what it had shown him. The older version of himself, standing with people beside him. "What do you need from me?" Harry said. Both men looked at him. "For the plan," Harry said. "What do you actually need from me?" Constantine looked at him with an expression he rarely showed, the careful, private pride of a man watching something he built working properly. "Time," he said. "And your continued observation. And trust that I'm handling the Quirrell situation in a way that removes the danger without escalating the crisis." "And Dumbledore?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, with the specific quality of someone adjusting a position they'd held for a very long time, "I need to give you information I had planned to give you later. On the theory that you," he stopped. "On the theory, which I am revising in real time, that you are fully capable of handling it now." "I am," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "You rather obviously are." He reached into his desk and produced a small sealed letter, old, the wax discolored with time. "Your mother left this. She left it with me before she died, with instructions that it be given to you when I judged you ready." He set it on the desk. "I have been, I think, too conservative in that judgment." Harry looked at the letter. At his mother's handwriting on the front, "For Harry, when the time is right." He picked it up and held it and didn't open it, not here, not in front of these two men who were both, in their different ways, watching too carefully. "Thank you," he said. He put the letter inside his robe. Constantine stood up. "We'll be in contact," he said to Dumbledore. "Frequently." "And Albus," he turned at the door. "The stone leaves after Christmas. Talk to Nicholas. It's past time." "I've been in contact," Dumbledore said, with a quality that suggested the contact had not entirely gone his way. "Then be in contact again and agree with him this time." He nodded at the headmaster, looked at Harry once, a look that contained multiple things efficiently compressed, and walked out. Harry stood up. "The things you were going to tell me later," he said to Dumbledore. "I'd like to hear them. At a time that suits." Dumbledore looked at him. "Your mother," he said quietly, "would have found you extraordinary." "I know," Harry said. "Constantine told me about her." Something in Dumbledore's expression, brief, private, the crack in the architecture widening for just a moment. "Of course he did," he said softly. "He loved her very much." Harry left the office and stood in the spiral staircase and took out the letter. His mother's handwriting. His name. A wax seal pressed with what looked like a small lily, not a formal seal, just a flower pressed into the wax with something small, the personal gesture of someone sealing a letter they weren't certain would ever be read. He went up to the empty astronomy tower, where the winter view stretched away to white hills and grey sky, and sat on the cold stone floor in his coat and opened the letter. He read it alone, which was the right way to read it. He read it 3 times. When he came down from the tower an hour later, Ron was in the corridor below with a chocolate frog and the chess board under his arm, having apparently decided without discussion that this was a waiting situation, which was exactly what it was. "All right?" Ron said. "Yeah," Harry said. He meant it. "Yeah, I am." They went to find a table for chess, and the castle was quiet around them, and outside the snow was starting again, steady and clean, covering everything with the particular mercy of fresh starts. Chapter 5, The Man with Two Faces. June arrived with the specific cruelty of exam season, long warm days that existed only to mock you through classroom windows while you sat inside reproducing the correct incantation for a switching spell or explaining, in not less than 2 feet of parchment, the historical development of anti-werewolf legislation in Wizarding Britain. The castle smelled of fresh grass and warm stone, and Hermione's revision schedules, which had proliferated to the point that Ron had found one tucked inside his Quidditch glove and accepted his fate. Harry sat his exams with the focused calm of someone who had been prepared for this kind of sustained intellectual effort since he was old enough to hold a book. Not with ease exactly, Hermione was a more complete academic than he was, with her systematic coverage and total absence of gaps, but with a particular quality of applied intelligence that expressed itself as unhurried precision. He finished each paper with time remaining. He used the time to check his work, not because he expected to find errors but because the habit was sound. Ron sat his exams with the expression of a man who had revised thoroughly under extreme external pressure and was mildly surprised to find it had worked. The practical exams were, for Harry, the more interesting portion. Flitwick's Charms Practical produced the expected result. Harry's spellwork was clean and precise and the feather he was asked to levitate did exactly what was required with no fuss, but the Transfiguration Practical was where McGonagall watched him with the specific attention of someone seeing something she wasn't going to comment on during the exam itself, which meant she was saving it for later. He transformed the assigned object cleanly, then on an impulse transformed it back in a way that altered the molecular structure rather than just the surface form, a deeper transfiguration, technically beyond the first-year curriculum, and then transfigured it again correctly and left it there. McGonagall made a note. He saw her make it. The defense against the dark arts practical was administered by Quirrell, which was its own experience. Harry performed adequately. Nothing exceptional, nothing that would draw attention. He could feel Quirrell watching him through the assessment with an intensity that wasn't about his exam performance, and he matched it with absolute surface neutrality and the private, steady knowledge of what was underneath the turban. 6 days into the exam period, Hermione sat down at breakfast with a piece of parchment and an expression that she was working to keep composed. "I spoke to Hagrid last night," she said quietly. "About Fluffy." Harry looked up from his eggs. Ron set down his pumpkin juice. "I asked him about how to deal with a three-headed dog," she said. "Just academically. He told me immediately because," she paused. "Because Hagrid is extremely kind and extremely forthcoming about magical creatures when asked nicely." "And?" Ron said. "Music," she said. "Any music sends it straight to sleep." He also," she looked at her parchment. "He mentioned he won Fluffy's dog specifications in a pub game from a stranger. A beat. A Greek stranger." Harry sat back. "Someone gave him the information on how to put the dog to sleep by playing cards with him in a pub." "It seems so," Hermione said. "Quirrell," Ron said immediately. "That's my conclusion," Hermione said. "He's been working through the protections systematically, gathering information, preparing. The exams are," she looked at Harry. "The exams give everyone a reason to be indoors and occupied. The staff are distracted. It's a window." Harry had been thinking the same thing since the exam schedule had gone up 3 weeks ago. The timing of the examination period was a structural vulnerability, not because Dumbledore hadn't noticed it, but because even Dumbledore couldn't simultaneously invigilate 6 years' worth of practical exams and monitor a possessed professor. The castle's attention was divided in ways it wasn't during normal term. He'd written to Constantine 4 days ago. The response had arrived yesterday, in the same Raven-delivered method, and it had said, "I know. I'm working on the Quirrell problem from a different angle and I need another week. Hold position." Harry had written back, "The window closes with the exams. He'll move during exam week or immediately after." Constantine had replied, "I know. Hold position." The emphasis had been clear. "We need to go down there," Harry said. Hermione looked at him. Constantine said, "Constantine is working a different angle that needs another week, and we might not have another week." He kept his voice low, the breakfast noise of the hall covering the conversation. "If Quirrell gets through before Constantine's angle resolves, the stone is gone and Voldemort has a body and the calculus changes completely." He looked at both of them. The protections were designed to be passable by someone specific. Dumbledore didn't make them impassable, he made them selective. "Selective how?" Ron said. "The chess set needs a chess player," Hermione said, ahead of him. "The logic puzzle needs logical thinking," Harry said. "The other obstacles between them will need specific skills. We have those skills." He looked at both of them properly, not to assess whether they were willing, he knew they were willing, but to make sure they understood what willing meant tonight. This is real danger. Quirrell has been at this for months. Whatever Voldemort is, he's functional and he's intelligent and he's desperate. If you want to stay, don't finish that sentence, Ron said. It would be insulting, Hermione said. Harry looked at them both for a moment. Then he nodded. Tonight, he said. After the last common room check. Midnight. The hours between breakfast and midnight had a specific quality that Harry recognized from the biker job and from a dozen other jobs before it, the waiting time, where the mind wants to race and the discipline is in not letting it. He revised for astronomy because the exam was in 2 days and the work was real regardless of what tonight was. He played chess with Ron, who beat him in 37 moves and seemed simultaneously delighted and subdued about it. He sat with Hermione in the library while she made final notes on the protection structure she'd compiled, over the past month, a genuinely impressive analysis of what each obstacle was likely to be and why, and he read his mother's letter one more time. He'd read it many times since Christmas. He knew it by heart now, and reading it was no longer an act of discovery but something more like maintaining contact with something he needed close. Lily Potter had written it the night before she died. She'd known, not precisely how, but known that the situation was moving towards something terminal. The letter was not long. It was written in the voice of someone who had decided against sentiment not because she lacked it but because sentiment was not the gift she wanted to give. She had written about magic, specifically about the tradition she'd come from, the cunning folk line that she'd never quite left behind despite Hogwarts and the formal wizarding world. She'd written about the protection, not as something she was going to do but as something she had decided, and the distinction was everything. She'd written, I want you to know this was a choice I made with full information and complete willingness. Not because I had to. Because you are worth every piece of me. And then, in a slightly different ink, as though added after a pause, John will look after you. He'll be terrible at it and brilliant at it simultaneously. Trust him. And at the very bottom, in what looked like an afterthought but wasn't, the love is real magic, Harry. Older than spells. They'll tell you it's a metaphor. It isn't. You carry it. Use it. He folded it back along its creases and put it in his inner pocket, where it had lived since December. At 11:30 he slipped the invisibility cloak over himself and moved through the castle. Not toward the 3rd floor yet, first to the stone gargoyle on the 3rd floor's east side, where he'd left something 3 weeks ago during a very late-night preparation session. A small piece of parchment, fixed to the back of the gargoyle's base, with a ward tied to it that he'd constructed from a method in the sympathetic magic book. If Quirrell had passed through the corridor between then and now, the parchment would show it. He retrieved the parchment, unfolded it in the torchlight. The ward had been triggered twice in the past 48 hours. Harry looked at the mark for a long moment. Tonight, he thought. Or already. He moved faster. The door was already unlocked when he reached it. Harry stood outside it and processed this for the 2 seconds he could afford, not dread, something cooler and more useful than dread, and then went through. The harp was playing. Fluffy was asleep. All 3 heads down, all 3 breathing in slow offset rhythm. The trapdoor was open. Harry went to the edge and looked down into darkness. Cool air rising. The smell of earth and old stone. He pulled the cloak off, it would be a liability in a descent, shoved it in his bag, and dropped. The drop was controlled, he landed in something soft and immediately wrong, the plant grabbing at his arms and legs with the specific hungry grip of Devil's Snare, and he went still. The reflex was from Constantine's training, most magical restraints escalate with resistance. Identify first, then act. Devil's Snare. Light averse. He produced a clear, bright light from his wand tip, not fire, better than fire for this application, a sustained white light that the plant hated with the comprehensive hostility of something encountering its primary weakness, and the tendrils released with an almost affronted speed. He was through in under 40 seconds. The next chamber held the keys. Hundreds of them, winged, swooping through the air in patterns that looked random and weren't. Harry tracked the trajectories for 30 seconds and identified the regularity, then caught the broom that was lying ready, mounted, and was in the air before the keys had completed half a circuit. He found the right one in under 2 minutes, not by methodical searching but by looking for the one with the bent wing, the one that had been used recently, its flight pattern slightly compromised. He snatched it from the air and was through the door in 3 minutes flat. The chess room stopped him for exactly as long as it took to see it. The board was enormous, life-size pieces, stone, with the weight and patience of objects that had been waiting for this. There was a second broom on the floor near the door, and the pieces were not in their starting positions. Someone had already played through here. Quirrell. The pieces had been reset, they reset automatically, Hermione had deduced, but some of them showed the fresh damage of a recent game, chips and stress fractures in the stone. Harry sat down on the floor, looked at the board, and thought. He needed to cross to the other side. He needed to take the right pieces, black, and play his way through. But Quirrell had already done this, which meant the board had absorbed information about a successful crossing in the recent past and the pieces knew it was solvable. The question was how Quirrell had done it. He studied the board for 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes less than he would normally give something like this, and saw the path. Not the same one Quirrell would have used, that path would require sacrifices Harry wasn't willing to make, a fact about the specific configuration of this game that he understood from its structure. His path was different. Harder to see, requiring a different kind of game. He took the Black Knight's position. And then he played. The pieces moved. They fought. A rook came at him with the focused violence of a chess piece that had been enchanted to take this extremely seriously, and Harry sidestepped it with a movement that translated the knight's L shape into actual physical space with the pragmatic athleticism of someone who had grown up in situations that occasionally required moving quickly. The queen made her presence known. He let her. The queen's arc was the most threatening and also the most predictable. Queens take the center of the board because that's where the power is, and the center of this board was exactly where he needed to be. He won in 19 moves. The pieces fell back. He walked through them to the far door. The troll in the next room was already down. Sprawled across the stone with the specific sprawl of something that had been hit hard and quickly, and the quality of what had taken it down was, Harry crouched by it and looked at the mark on its forehead, not a standard spell. Something with a specific signature that he recognized. Quirrell had been here very recently. Minutes, possibly. Harry moved through the troll room without touching anything and reached the next door. The flames. Black flames on the far side, purple on the near. Between them a table with 7 bottles, different shapes, different sizes, and Hermione's logic puzzle laid out in physical form with the precision of someone who had designed this knowing that the right person would understand it and the wrong people would stand here forever. Harry read the poem on the scroll in under a minute, examined the bottles, worked through the logic in 2 minutes, the sequence was soluble, unambiguously, from the given constraints, and identified the bottle that would let him through the black flames. He took the smallest bottle. It was cold. It was enough for one person. He went through. The final chamber was lit by torches that threw long shadows, and the mirror of Eriste stood against the far wall exactly as Harry had predicted, repositioned here as the last protection, its inscription glinting in the firelight. In front of it, with his back to Harry, was Quirrell. Not stuttering. Not performing. Standing with the stillness of someone who had stopped needing the act. "I wondered when you'd come through," Quirrell said, without turning. "I thought you'd be further along by now," Harry said. Quirrell turned. The difference was startling, not in his physical appearance, which was the same thin, pale man with the outsized turban, but in the entire quality of his presence. The nervous blink was gone. The carefully calibrated stammer was gone. What was left was something cooler and considerably more dangerous. "You've been watching me all year," he said. "Since September." "Since the first week," Harry said. He moved into the room, keeping the mirror in his peripheral vision, keeping Quirrell in front of him. The hands were too controlled. Real anxiety doesn't repeat itself that precisely. Quirrell smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Remarkable. You're 11 years old. I had good training, Harry said. Constantine, Quirrell said, with a specific quality, not dismissal, something more like the reluctant respect of one professional acknowledging another. The Hellblazer's ward. I've heard about you. Both of you. He cocked his head. He's not here. No, Harry said. Just you. Just me, Harry said. Quirrell looked at him steadily. Then this can be simple. The mirror, I've been standing in front of it for 20 minutes and I can see the stone. I can see it, Potter. I can see myself presenting it to my master, using it, but I cannot reach it. The protection prevents me from taking it. He spread his hands in a gesture that was almost reasonable. You have no investment in Dumbledore's plan. You have no attachment to this stone. You've been raised by a man who has no loyalty to the wizarding establishment. Stand in front of the mirror and take the stone. Give it to me. Walk away. No one needs to be hurt tonight. That's a very clean pitch, Harry said. I'm capable of clarity when I choose to be. You're also possessed by what's left of Voldemort, Harry said, which means the pitch isn't actually coming from you, which means I can't evaluate its sincerity. Quirrell's expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a flicker, deep and complex, the ghost of a man who had made choices that had brought him to this specific room on this specific night and who understood, somewhere that was still Quirrell rather than the thing riding him, exactly what those choices had cost. Voldemort offered me power, he said. Specifically, he offered me the thing every inadequate man wants, to stop being afraid. A beat. He delivered on the promise. I'm not afraid anymore. That's because he's eaten through the parts of you that were capable of fear, Harry said. That's not the same as courage. Something genuine moved through Quirrell's face, brief, real, the specific pain of an accurate statement landing in the only remaining tender spot. Then it closed over. Enough, said a voice that was not Quirrell's. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the air, from the shadows, from behind the turban. A voice with a quality of depth that had nothing to do with volume, the voice of something very old and very focused and very used to being obeyed. It raised every hair on Harry's arms. Let me look at the boy, said Voldemort. Quirrell moved his hands to the turban. He unwound it with the careful methodical motion of someone doing something they'd done before, and as it fell away Harry saw it, the face on the back of Quirrell's head, turned backward, white as chalk, with red eyes that found Harry across the chamber with the absolute focus of something that had been thinking about this moment for 10 years. Harry looked at Voldemort. Voldemort looked at Harry. Harry Potter, Voldemort said. The voice had a different quality face to face, something almost intellectual in it, assessing, the voice of a genuinely brilliant mind that had been shaped into something irreversible by choices made from a very specific kind of fear. You look like your father. So I'm told, Harry said. You have your mother's eyes, Voldemort said, and there was something in the way he said it, not sentiment, something more complex, the acknowledgement of something that had defeated him and was still, in some form, in this room. She was extraordinary. I respected that, even as I killed her. I'm not going to stand here while you monologue, Harry said. If you have something specific to say, say it. A pause. Then something that might have been a laugh in a voice that had forgotten what laughing felt like. Refreshing, Voldemort said. Your predecessors were more given to either terror or speech-making. Neither was particularly productive. The red eyes examined him with the professional thoroughness of a strategist assessing a position. The mirror shows you the stone. I know it does, you have no desire to use it, which means the protection does not bar you. Take the stone from the mirror and give it to me, and I will make you a very specific offer. What offer? Harry said, because knowing the offer was information. Your parents, Voldemort said. I can bring them back. Not as a fetch, don't insult both of us by thinking I mean something so crude. The stone produces the elixir of life, and the elixir in sufficient quantity can reverse death. Not easily, not quickly, but permanently. James and Lily Potter could live. The chamber was very quiet. Harry stood in the silence of this offer and felt it land, felt the specific gravity of it, the thing it was aimed at, the wound it was intended to find. He felt it the way you feel a hit when you know it's coming and you've braced and it still lands harder than the bracing accounted for. He thought about his mother's letter. About the wax seal. About the word choice. No, Harry said. You haven't considered. I've considered it, Harry said. In the time it took me to say no. The answer is no. They would live. My mother made a choice, Harry said, and his voice was level, not because he was suppressing anything but because the levelness was real, earned, the product of understanding rather than numbness. A complete, informed, deliberate choice. Reversing it without her consent would be a violation of her agency, not a gift to her. And my father's too. They chose their lives and they chose how they ended. That's not mine to undo. He paused. Also, you'd kill them again the first time it was useful. Voldemort was silent for a moment. When he spoke again the intellectual register was gone, replaced by something starker. Then we do this the other way. Before we do, Harry said, I want you to understand something. Quirrell's body turned to face him fully. The red eyes waited. You've built your entire existence on the assumption that death is the worst thing, Harry said. That avoiding it is worth any cost. That the people who accept it are weaker than the people who don't. He kept his voice even and his eyes on the red ones. My mother understood something about magic that you've spent your entire life being too afraid to learn. The oldest magic. The kind that doesn't come from power or knowledge or ambition. And it's the reason you're standing in a borrowed body in a room under a school begging an 11-year-old for a rock instead of ruling the world like you planned. The red eyes were very still. You're afraid, Harry said. You have always been afraid. You became what you are because of fear, and the fear didn't go away, it just got bigger and more elaborate and you built more walls around it and now the walls are all you have left. He looked at Voldemort with something that wasn't contempt exactly, something more like the particular steadiness of someone who understands what they're looking at. I'm not afraid of you. You should be, Voldemort said. Maybe, Harry said. But I'm not. He turned to the mirror. He walked to it without hesitation, without checking whether Quirrell was moving, he could hear whether Quirrell was moving, and stood in front of it and looked. He saw himself. The older version, the same one from November, and in the older version's hand was something small and red, warm-looking, a stone that caught the light in a way that suggested depth. The older version of him looked at it for a moment, then pocketed it with the casualness of someone deciding the stone was not going anywhere useful tonight. Something cold pressed against his actual hand. He felt it arrive in his pocket with the specific, clean impossibility of magic working as designed, the mirror's protection recognizing exactly what it had been built to recognize. Someone who wanted it but not for use. The stone was in his pocket. He turned. Quirrell was 3 feet away, hand extended, the red eyes burning. Give it to me. No, Harry said. Quirrell moved. Harry moved first. Not with a spell, with something older, something that the cunning folk tradition had preserved in its practical toolkit, a word strike, a direct magical impact that used the sympathetic resonance between a living magical person and a possessing entity to create interference. He'd practiced it on theoretical constructs with Constantine for 2 years. He'd never used it on an actual possession. He grabbed Quirrell's outstretched wrist. The effect was immediate and mutual, pain, genuine and sharp, radiating up his own arm, but Quirrell's reaction was catastrophically worse. The possessed man screamed, a sound that split into 2 registers simultaneously, the lower one inhuman, and pulled back. Where Harry's hand had been, the skin was blistered. But not Harry's skin. Quirrell's. What? Quirrell staggered, looking at his wrist. The red eyes had gone wide, the first genuine surprise Harry had seen in them. "What did you do?" "My mother," Harry said, "left me a specific gift." He could feel it, the protection, not as something external but as something in him, woven into the magic of what he was. The love protection that Lily Potter had built with her death. Not a shield exactly. More like an antithesis, something that Voldemort's fractured darkness couldn't touch without burning itself. "Your master killed her. You're wearing his face. The two of you touching me isn't going to go well." Quirrell gathered himself and lunged. Harry didn't run. He moved, sideways, using the momentum of Quirrell's lunge, catching the reaching hands and redirecting, and the contact each time produced that same blistering reaction, Quirrell making sounds that were increasingly less human and more Voldemort, the red-eyed fury underneath the borrowed face rising to the surface as the host deteriorated. He wasn't trying to destroy Quirrell. He was aware, somewhere beneath the urgency, that Quirrell was a victim as much as he was a threat, a man who had been broken down and inhabited by something that had used him until he was used up. Harry didn't have to destroy him. He had to hold him until the possession destabilized enough to. The crack sounded like something fundamental breaking. Quirrell dropped. Not unconscious, something more complete. He lay on the stone floor with his eyes open and the red light in them guttering like a candle in wind, the presence behind them becoming less coherent by the second, fracturing against the specific magic Harry carried without being able to do anything about it. Voldemort's voice, no longer from everywhere, now from the face on the back of Quirrell's head, diminished and vicious, said, "This is not over." "I know," Harry said. "I will come back," Voldemort said. "I always come back." "I know that too," Harry said. "But not tonight." The red eyes went out. The chamber went quiet. Harry stood in the silence and breathed and looked at Quirrell's still form on the floor and felt the aftermath settling through him, the shaking that his body wanted to do and that he allowed now that it was safe to, the specific cost of a situation resolved at physical and magical expense, the particular tiredness that came from using the love protection in the way his mother had told him he could in the letter she'd written the night before she died. He put his hand in his pocket. The stone was there. Small, real, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. He sat down on the floor of the chamber, a deliberate choice, and let himself be still for a moment. Just still. Above him, through several floors of stone and protection and a sleeping three-headed dog, the castle went about its nighttime business. Somewhere up there Ron had not slept and Hermione had probably organized her waiting into a series of structured activities. Somewhere in Hogsmeade or beyond, Constantine was doing the other angle thing he'd been working on, and Harry thought, with a specific clarity, that he would have a few things to say about hold position when they next met. The thought arrived warm, affectionate, completely genuine. He stood up. He took one more look around the chamber, the mirror, the torches, Quirrell on the floor breathing with the shallow rhythm of someone whose body had been through something catastrophic. He needed to get Quirrell to Dumbledore. He needed to get out of here. He performed a levitation on Quirrell, careful, clean, and moved toward the exit. Then he stopped. He looked at the mirror one more time. The reflection showed him nothing. Not the older version, not the stone, not a vision of desire. Just himself, standing in a cold room under a school with a levitated body behind him and a philosopher's stone in his pocket and his mother's letter folded against his heart. Just himself. He looked at that for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the stairs. Dumbledore met him on the third floor. Not by accident, Harry had the specific sense of a man who had been alerted the moment the trapdoor was disturbed and had spent the subsequent time making his way to the relevant location with the unhurried speed of someone who trusted the protections to buy him time. He was in his robes, not nightwear, which told Harry the alerting had happened before bed rather than during it. He looked at Harry. He looked at the levitating Quirrell. He looked at Harry again. "The stone," he said. Harry took it from his pocket and placed it in Dumbledore's hand. Dumbledore held it for a moment with the quality of a man handling something that represented a very large number of calculations having landed incorrectly. Then he looked at Harry with something that was beyond his usual careful warmth, something more direct, more stripped of performance. "Are you hurt?" "Not seriously," Harry said. "Quirrell needs medical attention. His body has sustained significant damage from the possession's deterioration and from the protection." He said this plainly, because there was no other way to say it. "Voldemort is gone from him. He'll need treatment." Dumbledore nodded. He conjured a stretcher with the ease of long practice, settled Quirrell onto it. Then he looked at Harry with the careful, honest expression Harry had seen once before, in his office after Christmas, when the architecture had cracked. "How long have you known the full picture?" "Most of it since November," Harry said. "The rest since Christmas." "And you went down tonight because the window was closing and I was the right person to go," Harry said. Not defensively. As a statement of fact. The protections were designed for someone with the right combination of skills. I had them. Constantine's angle needed more time than we had. So I went. Constantine is going to be very, Dumbledore paused. He is going to have strong feelings about this decision. Yes, Harry said. He is. And you went anyway. I'm his godson, Harry said. I'm not him. Something in Dumbledore's face moved, that crack again, wider now, the real man behind the strategic one visible for a longer moment. He looked at Harry with something that wasn't quite pride but was in its family, shot through with something more complicated, a man revising himself in real time. Quirrell, Harry said. Is he going to live? I hope so, Dumbledore said, and meant it. He was not an evil man, Potter. He was a frightened one. I know, Harry said. They looked at each other across the quiet corridor, the old man with the long plans and the crack in his architecture, and the boy who had grown up outside all of them, and there was, for a moment, the specific kind of honesty that exists between people who have just shared the same truth from different angles. Go to the hospital wing, Dumbledore said. I'll want to talk with you properly when you've rested. I know, Harry said again. He walked down the corridor toward the hospital wing, and behind him he heard Dumbledore moving in the other direction, toward the school's external wards where Harry suspected he was going to send a message, and he thought about the stone in the headmaster's hand and about Voldemort's voice saying I always come back and about his mother's letter saying the love is real magic. All three of those things were true simultaneously. He was going to need to hold all three of them at once. He was, he thought, reasonably capable of that. The hospital wing was warm and smelled of potions, and Madame Pomfrey took one look at him and began competently assessing the damage, and Harry let her because it was the sensible thing to do, and outside the windows the June night was doing whatever June nights did, warm and dark and full of the sounds of a summer that wasn't quite arrived, and upstairs, he knew, Ron and Hermione were waiting. He was going to have a great deal to tell them. Chapter 6, Aftermath, and the shape of what comes next. Madame Pomfrey kept him for 2 days. Not because he was seriously injured, the ward strike backlash had left a deep ache in his right arm that responded to her potions inside the first hour, and the magical expenditure of the night had left him with the specific tiredness that sleep addressed efficiently, but because Madame Pomfrey had a professional thoroughness that didn't negotiate with people who felt fine. You stayed until she said you didn't have to. This was not a discussion. Harry stayed. He slept for 14 hours the first night, which was apparently what his body had decided was necessary and which he didn't argue with. He woke to Ron sitting in the chair beside his bed eating an apple with the studied casualness of someone who had been sitting there for a while and was pretending he hadn't. Morning, Ron said. How long have you been there? Not long, Ron said, which was a lie of the specific kind that meant quite a while, but I'd rather not make it a thing. Harry sat up. The arm was better, a residual ache, nothing functional. The tiredness was down to something manageable. Outside the hospital wing windows the morning was clear and warm, the grounds green and bright with the particular excess of early summer. Hermione? Harry said. Checked you were breathing approximately every 40 minutes through the night and is now in the library because she said she couldn't sit still and at least the library was productive. Ron finished the apple. She cried a bit when they brought you in. She'll deny that. I won't bring it up, Harry said. Good. Ron looked at him. Dumbledore came by. He left you something. He gestured at the bedside table, a small folded note, nothing elaborate. Harry picked it up. Rest. We'll speak soon. Quirrell is alive. A.D. He set it back down. Harry, Ron said. Yeah. What actually happened down there? He said it without the breathless quality that the question might have had, just direct, the way Ron asked things when he genuinely wanted to know. You went through 6 levels of protection by yourself, faced Voldemort, got the stone, brought Quirrell out, and Pomfrey says there's no serious injury and you're not wrecked by it. He stopped. You seem okay. I am okay, Harry said. That should probably be weirder than it is, Ron said. Harry thought about how to answer this in a way that was honest without being a lecture. Do you know what the thing is about genuinely scary situations? He said. The thing that makes them survivable. Luck. Ron tried. Preparation, Harry said. Not luck. I've been preparing for something like that since I was about 6. Not that specific situation, I didn't know it would be a final chamber with Voldemort in someone else's head, but the shape of it. High stakes, improvised, irreversible. Constantine drilled me in those conditions until they felt like the right kind of familiar. He paused. The first time you're in something genuinely dangerous, the fear is total. The second time it's less. By the 10th time you've learned to use it rather than fight it. Ron was quiet for a moment. How many times has it been? More than 10, Harry said. Ron absorbed this. Right, he said eventually. Does that mean you're insane or does it mean you're really good at your job? Probably both, Harry said, which made Ron laugh, and the laugh broke something that had been slightly too careful in the air since Harry woke up, and they were back to normal. Hermione arrived 20 minutes later with a book she wasn't reading and 3 pages of notes she definitely was. She sat on the other side of the bed, looked at Harry with the specific assessment she developed over 9 months and now applied automatically, and said, You modified the ward strike theory from the sympathetic magic book. Yes, Harry said. The application to possession dynamics isn't in the text. No. I worked that out from Constantine's journals and some additional reading in December. She nodded, making a small note. The mirror protection worked exactly as you predicted. It did. Which means your theory about Dumbledore's design was correct. It means one piece of it was correct, Harry said. Confirmation of a prediction isn't confirmation of the whole model. She looked at him over her notes with an expression that was trying not to be warm and wasn't quite succeeding. You're maddening, she said. You know that. I've been told, Harry said. By Constantine. Regularly. Ron reached across the bed and stole the apple core back from where Harry had set it, examined it, determined there was nothing left, and put it down. So what happens now, he said. The stone, Dumbledore has it. And it's going back to Flamel, Harry said. That was Constantine's condition. It was discussed at Christmas. And Quirrell's alive, Hermione said. The note she made here was slightly more careful. That matters. You could have, she stopped. I know, Harry said. I didn't want to. Some people would have, she said. Not an accusation. An observation, made with the precision she applied to everything. He was possessed by Voldemort. He tried to kill you twice. Most people would consider the outcome, terminal, to be justified. Most people would be wrong, Harry said simply. Quirrell was a victim of the possession as much as anything else. Voldemort broke him down deliberately over time. Killing Quirrell to stop Voldemort when Voldemort was already functionally stopped, that's not justice. That's convenience dressed up as necessity. Ron was looking at him with the expression of someone experiencing a genuine recalibration. You really did think all of this out. In the hospital wing, lying there, Harry said. I had time. You thought it out lying there with backlash damage from a ward strike, Hermione said. While Madame Pomfrey was running diagnostic spells on you. It was either that or stare at the ceiling, Harry said. I didn't want to stare at the ceiling. She laughed, a real one, short and genuine, the kind she didn't manufacture. Ron looked pleased with himself for witnessing it. Outside the hospital wing windows the morning was getting on, and somewhere in the school's several hundred rooms the normal life of the place was continuing, classes, common rooms, the library filling up with last-minute exam revision. The world resizing itself from last night's scale back to something ordinary, which was the thing about Aftermath that Harry had learned was important. You let the scale change. You didn't stay in crisis proportions when the crisis had resolved. Pomfrey released him mid-afternoon with a list of things he was not to do for 48 hours that he listened to carefully and mostly intended to follow. He walked out of the hospital wing with Ron on one side and Hermione on the other, and the June sunlight hitting the stone corridor at the angle it hit things in early afternoon, and everything was exactly what it was and no more. Dumbledore's note came that evening, when you're ready. Harry went up after dinner, alone. He'd told Ron and Hermione where he was going and they'd understood without requiring explanation that this was something to do solo, which was one of the things about having spent 9 months with people who actually knew him. The explanations became optional. The office was the same as always, but with the quality of a room that had been recently reorganized in small ways. The spinning instruments adjusted, the fox perch shifted slightly, one of the dozing portraits replaced with a different one that Harry didn't recognize. Dumbledore behind his desk looked rested in the particular way of someone who had made some decisions and was no longer carrying the weight of the undecided ones. He didn't offer a sherbet lemon. He just looked at Harry with the honest configuration, the one Harry had seen 3 times now, the one without the performance layered over it. Sit down, Harry, he said. Harry sat. Quirrell will recover, Dumbledore said. Physically. The possession's damage is considerable and the recovery will be long, but he will live. He paused. He has already been, debriefed isn't quite the right word. Help to understand what happened. He has very little memory of the possessed period beyond impressions. What memories he does have are, another pause. Difficult. He'll need someone to talk to, Harry said. Not ministry people. Someone who understands possession specifically. Dumbledore looked at him. Do you have a recommendation? Constantine knows 3 people who specialize in supernatural trauma, Harry said. I can ask him for names. I would appreciate that, Dumbledore said, and the fact that he said it without qualification, without the careful management of the offer, was itself significant. Another piece of the architecture adjusted. The stone will be returned to Nicholas by the end of the week. He has agreed, under some pressure from both myself and John, to discontinue his work on the stone's particular application. He's going to destroy it, Harry said. Eventually. Yes. Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. He and Perenelle have discussed it. At 600 years, they feel, he stopped. They feel they have had enough time. Harry thought about that. 600 years of life, and the decision to stop. The specific courage of accepting a limit that you have the means to extend. His mother's letter moved against his chest. And Voldemort, he said. Gone, Dumbledore said. For now. Whatever remained of him was anchoring itself to Quirrell's body, and the disintegration of that anchor when the protection activated was sufficient to disperse what was left of his current form. He looked at Harry directly. But you know he isn't gone permanently. He told me himself, Harry said. He always comes back. Yes, Dumbledore said. He does. He was quiet for a moment. Harry, I want to speak to you about the year. About what I did and didn't do, and about what I intend to do differently. He said this with the specific quality of someone who had rehearsed a version of this and then set the rehearsal aside and was speaking without it. I had a plan for you. I have had a plan for you since the night your parents died. It was a plan built on assumptions about who you would be, what you would know, what you would need to become. Almost all of those assumptions were wrong. Harry waited. I believed that keeping you ignorant, keeping you ordinary, as I understood ordinary, would protect you from the weight of what you are. What you carry. He paused. I believed that innocence was armor. John has always believed the opposite, that knowledge is armor. That ignorance leaves you exposed. He looked at his hands. I have spent 9 months watching him be comprehensively correct about this, and I want to tell you that I understand why it happened the way it did. I know you do, Harry said. That's not the same as changing the approach. Dumbledore looked at him. No, he said. It isn't. So let me be specific about the change. From this point, I will tell you what I know. About Voldemort, about the war, about what happened to your parents and why. I will not decide what you are ready for. I will give you the information and trust you to decide what to do with it. He paused. That is a significant departure from my previous approach, and I want you to know I mean it rather than merely offering it. Harry looked at him for a long moment. There's a thing you haven't told me yet, he said. About the night my parents died. About why Voldemort came for me specifically. About why there's a target on me that's older than a grudge. Dumbledore was very still. I don't need to know today, Harry said. But I need to know before it becomes relevant. I need to know in time to prepare, not in time to react. He held the old man's gaze steadily. That's the difference. You gave Quirrell's situation to me in time to react. Whatever the next thing is, I need it in time to prepare. There is a prophecy, Dumbledore said. I thought there might be, Harry said. Dumbledore stood and moved to the pensieve on the cabinet behind his desk, a shallow stone bowl filled with something silvery, and stood with his back to Harry for a moment. Then he turned. Not tonight. You've earned the rest you're owed. But before you leave for summer, before John takes you from here, I will tell you everything. The full picture. All of it. He said it with the quality of a promise rather than a reassurance, which was a distinction Harry had learned to feel for. You have my word. All right, Harry said. He stood to leave, and then stopped. Quirrell, he said, without turning fully around. Whatever happened to him, whatever he did, make sure someone takes care of him. Actually takes care of him. Not as a case file. I will see to it personally, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded and left the office and went down the spiral staircase into the corridor, and the school moved around him in its evening patterns, and the June warmth was in the stone, and tomorrow was tomorrow. The letter went to Constantine that night, and the response arrived the next morning before breakfast, not by Raven this time, by Mab, who had been in Hogsmeade apparently and returned with the expression of an owl who had eaten well and had opinions about Harry's recent choices. The letter was a single page. Harry opened it in the dormitory while Ron was still asleep. I'm going to be very calm about this. I'm going to be calm because you made a considered decision with the information available to you and the outcome was successful and you're physically fine. These are the relevant facts. I am keeping my eyes on the relevant facts. What I am not going to do is pretend I didn't spend approximately 6 hours not knowing if you were alive or dead because you went through a trapdoor into a possession situation without backup and without telling me first. I'm also not going to pretend that when Dumbledore's owl reached me at 2 in the morning to say you were in the hospital wing and Quirrell was contained and the stone was safe, I felt anything other than, well. You know what I felt. We'll talk when I arrive. I'm coming Friday. JPS. You were right about the window closing. I was wrong about the timeline. That doesn't mean you were right to go alone. PPS. You were right to go alone. PPS, don't tell me I said that. Harry folded the letter, put it in the notebook, and went down to breakfast. The end-of-year feast was that evening, the great hall transformed again, the 4 house tables gleaming, and the peculiar emotional quality of an end of term that had been an extraordinary year pressing against the ordinary celebratory format of the occasion. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione and Neville and a handful of others and ate and talked and listened to the particular noise of it, a school full of people who had no idea what had happened 3 nights ago in the rooms below the 3rd-floor corridor, going about the cheerful ordinary business of being 11 and 12 and having finished their exams. This was the thing he'd thought about in the hospital wing, in the quiet between Pomfrey's checks. The school full of people who didn't know. That wasn't a failure of the information management. That was the whole point. Dumbledore's protections, however imperfect the strategy around them, had kept 600 children safe for a full year while Voldemort operated in their midst. That deserved acknowledgement, even in the context of the things that had been wrong about it. Dumbledore awarded Gryffindor last-minute points, to Hermione for logic, to Ron for the chess, to Harry for the specific courage of facing the singular darkness at the heart of this year's events with a clear head and a steady hand, which was understated to the point of being almost funny, and a final 10 to Neville for something that happened in November that Harry had heard about third hand and which apparently involved Neville standing up to people he was afraid of, which in Harry's estimation was among the more impressive things anyone had done all year. Gryffindor won the House Cup. Slytherin had won it on points for most of the year, and the reversal produced the specific reaction you'd expect, Slytherin table going silent with a particular quality of silence, Gryffindor erupting, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw divided on the appropriate response. Draco Malfoy, across the hall, was doing something with his face that was trying very hard to be nothing. Harry looked at him. Not with triumph, he didn't feel triumphant about this. With the particular interest he'd maintained in Draco all year, the interest in someone who was performing a version of himself that didn't quite fit, who wanted something he wasn't being given permission to want. Draco looked back. His eyes were complicated in a way his face didn't usually allow. Harry nodded, once. Draco looked away. It was nothing and it was not nothing, and it would, Harry thought, remain unresolved for a while longer. Friday came in with low warm cloud and the specific light of a Scottish June morning that manages to be golden despite being filtered through 3 layers of weather. The Hogwarts Express left at 11, and the platform at Hogsmeade Station had the chaotic warmth of hundreds of people going home, trunks everywhere, owls in cages, parents appearing from the non-magical end of the platform with the various expressions of people reuniting with children who had been away for 9 months. Harry stood with Ron and Hermione on the platform with his trunk and Mab's cage, and the 3 of them were doing the specific thing they'd been doing for the past 2 days, talking about everything except the fact that they were about to not be in the same place for 3 months. Because that was a thing that apparently needed careful management in the emotional register. Right immediately, Hermione said. I mean it. I'm going to be starting the theoretical reading for 2nd year over the summer and I want a reading group, Ron said. You want a reading group? I want correspondence, she said. That's different. All right, Harry said. She looked at him. Regularly. Not just when something happens. Regularly, he agreed. Ron grabbed his arm suddenly, not dramatically, just a grip, solid and direct. This was a good year, he said. I mean it. Even the bits. This was a really good year. Harry looked at him. Ron's freckled face was straightforward in the way he was when he meant something completely. Yeah, Harry said. It was. A familiar shape at the platform entrance, the coat, the slightly too loose tie, the hands in pockets. Constantine moved through the platform crowd with the specific quality he had in public spaces of existing slightly outside the normal flow of things, visible and not visible simultaneously. He reached Harry, looked at him for the full 2 seconds, and then looked at Ron and Hermione. Constantine, Harry said. Ron Weasley. Hermione Granger. Constantine looked at them both with the assessing quality he applied to everything. Ron met it with his usual straightforward good nature. Hermione met it with a quality that Harry recognized immediately as respect being offered to someone whose work she'd read. She'd been into the sympathetic magic text for 2 weeks now. I've heard about both of you, Constantine said. Good things, hopefully, Ron said. Specific things, Constantine said, which was better. Hermione said, your approach to sympathetic magic theory in the application chapter, the section on correspondent objects, there are 2 points where the logical chain seems incomplete. I made notes. Constantine looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, the quick recalibration of a man encountering something he hadn't expected. Those sections were deliberately incomplete, he said. The full methodology is in the unpublished continuation. I gathered there was more, Hermione said. The framing suggested it. A pause. Harry's right, Constantine said to Harry. She's extraordinary. Hermione looked at Harry. Harry smiled. The train's whistle sounded. Ron grabbed his trunk. Hermione checked her bag with the automatic thoroughness of someone who had never in her life left anything behind. They said their goodbyes in the particular rushed compression of a departure, and then the crowd was moving and Ron and Hermione were on the train and Harry was on the platform with Constantine and the summer was ahead of them. Constantine picked up Harry's trunk without being asked and they walked toward the platform exit. The train was pulling away behind them, gathering the particular noise of something large beginning to move. Dumbledore wants to speak to you, Harry said. I know. He wrote. He navigated around a family with 3 owls and a cat engaged in a sustained argument. I told him I'd see him before we left. He's going to tell me about the prophecy, Harry said. He offered it voluntarily. Constantine looked at him. He offered it voluntarily. Before I asked, Harry said. Well, I indicated I knew there was something, and he said he'd tell me before we left. That's, Constantine was quiet for a moment. That's a change. I think the year changed things for him, Harry said. Seeing the plan fail. Or not fail exactly, succeed in the wrong shape. Voldemort's gone and the stone is safe and everyone's alive, but it didn't happen the way he planned and what happened instead was better. He paused. I think he's doing the thing intelligent people occasionally do when the evidence is overwhelming. Updating, Constantine said. Updating, Harry agreed. They came out of the platform onto the Hogsmeade High Street, quiet now that the train had gone, the village returning to its usual level of gentle magical activity. Constantine set the trunk down and looked up at the castle on the hill, visible against the cloudy sky with the specific presence that ancient places have in the landscape, not looming, just there, permanent and particular. How's the arm, he said. Fine. How's the rest of it? Harry considered this. Fine, he said again, with a different quality this time. Constantine looked at him sideways. That bad? Not bad, Harry said. Just, it was bigger than I expected. Not the danger. I expected the danger. Him. He meant Voldemort. He was exactly what you'd expect. Intelligent, specific, frightening in the ways that are real rather than theatrical. But also just, he paused, looking for the word. Small. In a specific way. Like something that has been eating itself for so long there's not much left. That's accurate, Constantine said. He offered me my parents, Harry said. A silence. The Hogsmeade Street went about its business around them. I know, Constantine said. Dumbledore mentioned it. He thought it would work. It's the offer most people can't refuse, Constantine said. That's why he uses it. I refused it, Harry said. Not because I don't, he stopped. I miss them. I miss who they would have been. But Mum's letter was clear about what she chose and why, and I'm not going to unmake a choice she made completely and deliberately. That's hers. He paused. And anyway, he would have killed them again the moment it was convenient. Yes, Constantine said. He would have. He's not gone, Harry said. He said so. He's not gone, Constantine agreed. He never really goes. He finds a way back because he's invested everything into not being gone, and that investment is, it's thorough. Whatever he did to himself to survive death the first time, it has roots we haven't dug up yet. Horcruxes, Harry said. Constantine stopped walking. He turned and looked at Harry with the full attention, the complete, undivided, sharp-edged version that he very rarely deployed. Your mother's letter, Harry said. She mentioned it. Not the word, she didn't use the word. But the concept. She said he'd split himself. Made himself unkillable through an act of catastrophic dark magic. She said she didn't know how many times. He met Constantine's eyes. She said you might know more. Constantine was quiet for a long moment. Around them the village moved gently in the summer morning. A witch with an enormous shopping basket crossed the street. A cat sat in a window and disagreed with everything. I know some, Constantine said carefully. Not all. I've been following the theory for years. It's the kind of dark magic that leaves traces in the surrounding magical field, if you know what to look for. He looked at Harry. It's not something we deal with this year. I know, Harry said. I'm not asking to deal with it this year. I'm asking you to tell me what you know. Another pause. Then, yes. I'll tell you. He picked up the trunk again. Everything I know. When we're home. Home. The Newcastle flat, which smelled like cigarette smoke and something older and which was condemned and which had the specific quality of a place that kept standing through stubbornness, the only kind of architecture worth trusting. Harry picked up Mab's cage. Mab regarded him with the amber-eyed patience of a barn owl who has decided that accompanying a person through the strange choices of their life is, on balance, acceptable. They walked toward the apparition point at the edge of the village, and the castle was behind them on its hill, and ahead of them was summer and the flat and everything that needed to be learned before next year. John, Harry said. Yeah. Thank you for going to Dumbledore when it was happening. For pushing him. That's not, Constantine started, and then stopped. It mattered, Harry said. The conversation at Christmas. What he gave me because of it. He thought about the letter, folded against his chest where it had lived for 6 months. She wrote me about love being real magic. He gave me that because you made him. Constantine was quiet for a long moment. They reached the edge of the village where the apparition point was marked by a small stone that looked like a milestone and wasn't. She would have found a way to get you that letter regardless, Constantine said. She was your mother. She always found the way. He looked at the castle one more time. I just accelerated the timeline. Still, Harry said. Still, Constantine allowed. He looked at Harry with the expression that he kept brief and private, and that was the truest version of how he felt about any of it, the boy he'd been terrible and brilliant at raising, the godson he'd collected from the wreckage of one night 10 years ago, the person who was currently 11 years old and had faced Voldemort in a room under a school and come back up the stairs with a philosopher's stone in his pocket and the specific calm of someone who had been in the dark and found their way out. You did well, Constantine said. It was 3 words, from a man who didn't waste words, and it landed exactly as heavily as it was meant to. Ready? Constantine said. Yes, Harry said. They disapparated. Dumbledore's meeting with Constantine happened that afternoon, in the headmaster's office, without Harry present. Harry knew this because Constantine told him afterward, in the flat, over tea, proper tea, made in the actual pot, which Constantine only did when something had been significant. What happened? Harry said. We talked, Constantine said. For how long? 2 hours. He poured. He told me about the prophecy. The full text. He set the pot down. We discussed the Horcrux theory. He's been developing the same conclusions independently, different methodology, same destination. He has more pieces than I do on the school years side. I have more pieces than he does on the supernatural tradition side. So you're working together, Harry said. We're sharing information, Constantine said. That's different from working together. It means we've agreed that the thing we both want, which is Voldemort actually finished this time, properly, irreversibly, is more important than our respective approaches to the boy who's going to be at the center of it. Harry held his mug. The boy being me. The boy being you. Constantine looked at him directly. The prophecy names you specifically. You're the one with the power to end him. Not because of destiny as a mystical force. I want to be clear, I think destiny as a mystical force is theological window dressing, but because of the specific magical circumstances of your survival, what your mother's sacrifice created in you, and what Voldemort himself activated when he marked you as his equal. He paused. He chose you. That choice is now real magic in its own right. He made it real by making it. He made me dangerous to him specifically, Harry said. Yes. By trying to kill me. Yes. Harry sat with this. Outside the window the Newcastle evening was doing its thing, grey and lively, the particular city noise of a place that doesn't quiet down. Somewhere 2 streets over a door was being argued with. Traffic. A snatch of music. Tell me about the Horcruxes, Harry said. Constantine told him. It took most of the evening and 2 pots of tea, and the information was as dark as Harry had expected and considerably more specific, and when it was done Harry sat in the flat with the full picture for the first time, not all the details, not the locations, not the how to destroy, but the shape of it, the real architecture of what Voldemort had done to himself and what it meant and what was going to happen eventually. He sat with it for a long time. There's one in me, isn't there, Harry said finally. Constantine was very still. The night he killed my parents, Harry said. The killing curse rebounded. He was in the process of making himself unkillable and the magic broke. A soul fragment detached. And it had nowhere to go except, he looked at his own hands. Except the living magical person in the room. We don't know for certain, Constantine said carefully. But you think so? A pause. I think it's the most consistent explanation for the scar and for the specific quality of your magical signature and for the fact that Voldemort was able to, when he was in Quirrell's face, when he spoke to you, there was a resonance. He said this with the precision of someone reporting what they know while being honest about its limits. I think it's possible. I think we need more information before we act on it. If it's true, Harry said, then ending Voldemort might mean ending me. If it's true, Constantine said, then we find a way around it. Because that's what we do. He said it flat and final, the way he said things that weren't negotiable. The prophecy says neither can live while the other survives. It does not say you have to die to make that happen. Prophecies are not instructions. They're descriptions of a pressure point. How you approach the pressure point is not in the prophecy. Harry looked at him. I will not, Constantine said, and the flatness in his voice had something underneath it now, something that had no interest in being hidden, let you be sacrificed. By Dumbledore's plan or anyone else's. We find a way that doesn't require that. We find it before it becomes an emergency. And if someone, anyone, including Dumbledore, proposes a solution that requires your death as a component, they will have to go through me first. The flat was quiet except for the city outside. I know, Harry said. Good, Constantine said. Harry looked at his tea. He had 60 years to find a way through it, he said. Voldemort. 60 years to learn to understand what my mother knew, what the oldest magic can do, and he never did because he started from the wrong assumption and couldn't update. He decided love was weakness and built everything on that decision. And it's why he lost, Constantine said. To a 1-year-old in a crib. And to an 11-year-old in a room under a school, Harry said. Twice now, technically, Constantine said. To the same bloodline. The same magic, Harry said. Not bloodline. Magic. Constantine looked at him. The careful, private expression, held for longer this time. Yes, he said. The same magic. They sat in the flat while Newcastle did its thing outside and the summer moved through its first evening, and Mab was on her perch by the window looking at the city with professional interest, and the grimoires were on the shelves where they'd always been, and the table had the same ancient sturdiness that had survived 2 condemnations and intended to survive more. Harry thought about the mirror. The older version of himself, standing with people beside him. The stone in the reflected hand, being pocketed without drama. The image of someone who had become something and was still in the process of becoming it. He thought about Hermione's 3 pages of notes in a book she wasn't reading, about Ron's grip on his arm on the platform, about Neville's face when the Sorting Hat said Gryffindor, about McGonagall's careful note during the Transfiguration practical. He thought about his mother's letter and what she'd said about love as actual measurable magic, not metaphor. He thought about Voldemort saying "I always come back," and about the specific shape of what Voldemort didn't know and had never learned to know, and about what that gap meant for how things would eventually end. "Next year," Harry said. "Next year," Constantine agreed. "What do we do differently? We go in with more information and better preparation and we stop treating the situation like something that can be held off." He lit a cigarette, the first of the evening, which by his usual standards was restrained. "Voldemort's going to work toward a body. The Horcruxes make him anchored, he can't fully die, which means eventually he finds a way back into a form that can act. We have a window to locate and destroy the Horcruxes before he's substantial enough to be truly dangerous again." "Dumbledore's working on it," Harry said. "And now so am I," Constantine said. "And so are you, in the capacity appropriate to being 12 years old, which is learning and preparing and building the relationships that will matter when the situation becomes critical." "Ron and Hermione," Harry said. "Ron and Hermione," Constantine confirmed. "And whoever else. You're going to need people, Harry. Not because you can't do things alone, you've demonstrated that thoroughly, but because the things you can't do alone are the things that will actually matter." Harry nodded. "Constantine," he said. "Still John," he said. "As many times as you try." "John," Harry said, with the ease of something well practiced. "You said the people who'd been alongside you, the ones who weren't around anymore, don't," Constantine said, not harshly. "I'm not going to die," Harry said. "I'm not planning on it. I'm not going to let you plan on it either." He said it straight, the way Constantine said things. "I'm also not going to let you keep me at arm's length because of what happened to them. That's not what my mum chose you for." Constantine was quiet for a long moment. The cigarette burned. The city moved outside. Mab shifted on her perch with the dignified restlessness of an owl who considers emotional conversations inefficient. "She knew exactly what she was doing," Constantine said finally, "when she put your name next to mine." "She always did," Harry said. Something settled in the flat, not sentimentally, not with any drama. Just the particular quality of 2 people who have understood something clearly and are sitting in the understanding of it without needing to perform it further. Constantine smoked and looked at the window. More actions. Claude Sonnet 4.